The Omega's Final Curse. A Werewolf Shifter Romance Audiobook. Written by Rain Hart. Chapter 1. The Blind Omega and the Broken Moon. The silence was never empty. It breathed. It screamed. It begged. And Lyssandra Dreamere stood in the center of it, kneeling on cracked frost stone, chains of carved bone wrapping around her wrists and ankles, a collar locking her throat in place like a leash no one wanted to hold. Behind her blindfold, the world pulsed in cold hues she could not see but could feel through her skin like wind through wolf fur. She did not weep. Ashvale Coal Court held no space for tears. She heard the soldiers first, not their boots crunching the ice, but the mutters in their skulls, thoughts flickering like embers in a dying hearth. Each one of them burned with the same contempt. Is that her? The mute wolf. Why hasn't she screamed yet? No howl, no worth. She's no better than the beasts we hunt. Let the ice take her. Lyssandra lowered her head further, not in submission but in stillness. In rebellion. She could hear every lie, every fear, every instinct they tried to chain down. That was her curse. That was her gift. That was why they brought her here. A sacrificial pit cloaked in royal pretense, the coal court was an open-air execution slab, watched over by ancient statues of long-dead alpha kings, each crowned with twisted antlers and hollow sockets that stared blindly into the bloodless snow. Somewhere above her, the moon strained behind a veil of clouds, trying to pull free. Her knees ached. The chain dug deeper. But inside her chest, the symphony of 100 unspoken voices echoed louder than any war cry. "Bring forth the girl," Abeda announced, his voice echoing across the marbled gallery built for judgment. He didn't look at her directly. None of them did. Not the nobles, not the wolves, not even the hollow-eyed priest who lifted the ceremonial blade high above his head. "Let her howl," came the call from the blood chamber stairs, where the aristocracy sat in their shadow-drenched cloaks. "If she is pure-blooded, the howl will answer. If not, silence will be her noose," another voice added. Lyssandra was yanked to her feet. The bone chains clattered against the ice like a dead man's wind chimes. Her breath steamed in the air, her lungs painfully slow to draw another. She did not resist. She did not look around. She listened. Each heart beat differently. Some out of duty, some out of hatred. Some were quieter, harder to decipher. But none of them sounded like truth. The ceremonial knife flashed silver in the torchlight. One step closer. She should speak. She should call out. She should howl. But she never had. They didn't know that her throat was unmarked, untouched by any bond, not because she was unworthy, but because she refused. There had been no wolf to share the vow with. She heard it again. Alpha's son shouldn't be watching this. He's up there, isn't he? What does he want with the cursed girl? Lyssandra blinked beneath the blindfold. She tilted her chin slightly, catching the drift of one mind, like smoke from a dying fire. It wasn't watching her. It wasn't thinking of her. It wasn't thinking at all. It was listening. Not to the ceremony. Not to the crowd. But to something deeper. Something that ached. A howl not made for the throat, but for the bones. Her fingers curled inward. And then, footsteps. Measured. Controlled. Effortless. Lord Severin Vaendar. She didn't need her sight to know him. His thoughts were the easiest to read, not because they were loud, but because he knew she was always listening. He painted them for her. Like a painter flaunting his brushstrokes. "How lucky you are," his thoughts whispered as he passed. "To die without ever truly being seen." He approached slowly, stopping just behind her. "Your name is Lyssandra Dreamere," he said softly, voice almost indulgent. "And yet, you bear no howl. No mark. No claim. No vow." The silence bit her ears. He crouched to her level. "I would pity you," he went on, brushing a lock of her silver ash hair back from her cheek, "if you weren't such an offense to order." She didn't flinch. "I ask you once," Severin said, louder now, for all gathered to hear. "Do you howl? Do you carry the mark of the moon?" The crowd held its breath. The torchlight shifted. A single flake of snow drifted from the sky, melting before it reached the ground. And Lyssandra Dreemir remained silent. The priest raised the knife again. Severin's voice dropped to a whisper. Then let the silence end. The blade fell. The moon broke. A sound, no, a force, shook the entire court. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't thunder. It was a tear in the sky. The clouds split like silk. The moon above, once pale and full, fractured down the center with a vein of red, glowing like a wounded eye. The wind stopped breathing. The statues groaned. The priest staggered back, blade clattering to the ice. Lyssandra stood still. Inside her skull, voices collided. Hundreds. Thousands. But one was different. A voice buried in shadows. Low. Weighted. Familiar and foreign. It didn't speak like the others. It didn't taunt. It didn't shout. It mourned. Why do they still try to make you kneel? Her lip parted. She had never heard him before. Never felt that presence. But now it was as clear as blood against snow. And it wasn't Severin. It wasn't a king. It wasn't any of them. The crowd screamed. Some dropped to their knees, others fled. The fracture in the moon pulsed once. Then faded. But the sky had already changed. The cold court fell into silence. And in that silence, Severin rose to his feet. Calm. Composed. His golden eyes glinting like coins flipped in judgment. He stepped over the fallen priest. She is touched, he said, as if making a statement to a board council. Too valuable to waste now. He turned toward the guards, gesturing with a single finger. Take her to the bone echo chamber. Keep her locked. Do not touch her. Do not speak to her. We will need her soon. Lyssandra didn't resist as the chains tugged again. Her bones were still singing, not with fear, but with a voice she'd never known before. One that didn't demand her silence, but asked to share it. Chapter 2, The Prince of Howl. The walls of the tower bled. Not with blood, but with bone. Whispering bone, twitching bone, ancestral bone. Vaelric Thorfell stood in the center of the spiraled chamber, bare-chested and breathless, the cold wind from the broken archway biting against his sweat-laced skin. The dream hadn't ended. It never ended. Not truly. Around him, etched into the stone, were claw marks, not his own, but his father's, his grandfather's, the bloodline of Thorfell traced in agony. Their voices still reverberated through the marrow of this place, deep and aching like a chorus buried beneath the snow. Drink. Bind her. Take the howl or be nothing. He gritted his teeth. The bone staff in his hand pulsed, a shard of moonstone fused with blackened marrow. A weapon carved during a fractured eclipse, gifted to him on his 13th winter when he refused to bite the throat of a tethered Omega during the trial of first marking. He'd left the beast untouched. And his howl never came. Since then, the voices had never stopped. Silence, he whispered. But the ancestors didn't obey silence. They were made of it. She will burn you, one growled. Or you will burn her. He drove the staff down. It cracked against the obsidian floor. The dream, if it was one, shattered into pale mist. The whispering ceased. Not because they were gone, but because they had retreated. Temporarily. Vaelric straightened, wiped the sweat from his brow, and looked toward the jagged window carved into the east wall. Beyond it, the morning sun struggled to rise through the crimson-drenched clouds. The bloodline moon had not yet healed. A red seam still scarred its center. He wondered if she saw it. No, heard it. He hadn't seen her. Only her breath. Only the silence around her. But somehow, that silence had carved into his ribs more deeply than any ancestral howl. He dressed in silence, fastening the silver and cold tunic of the House Thorfell, adjusting the shoulder clasp that bore the crest of the shattered crown. His hair, dark as crow feathers, fell loose around his face, only half hiding the tension along his jaw. Outside the tower, Garn waited. The guard straightened as Vaelric descended. "My prince," Garn said stiffly. "The citadel is sealed. After last night's interruption, Lord Severin has requested your presence." "Requested," Vaelric echoed, lips dry. "Formally," Garn corrected, eyes flicking to the staff in Vaelric's grip. "He doesn't like this," Vaelric said quietly. "That I still carry it. It reminds him you haven't chosen." "I have." Garn hesitated. "He means the ritual, my lord. The blood bonding." Vaelric began walking. Garn fell into step beside him, though it was clear the soldier would have preferred distance. Most did. Vaelric's presence was quieter than it should have been, not blank, just unreadable. The court never trusted what they couldn't hear. "The next blood oath trial is scheduled for the eclipse," Garn offered carefully. "There are 3 candidates." "I won't choose one," Vaelric replied. "They're not asking. I never asked to be born with this." He gestured to the blackened bone staff in his hand. "They call it legacy," he said. "I call it a curse." They walked in silence, past towering arches, through corridors carved with the ancestral names of wolves long dead. The Mumir garden glistened just beyond, a pale courtyard where glass-grown lilies reflected whatever phase the sky wore. Today, they shimmered red. A bad omen. That's when he heard it. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't even a voice. Just a breath, sharp, raw, threaded with something alive. A sound that didn't belong. He paused. Garn took a step before realizing Vaelric had stopped. "My lord." Vaelric turned his head. They were passing the Bonehowl Vault, a sealed hallway forbidden to all but the high blood priests. A door with no lock, only carved warnings. No wolf unbound may enter. He had never dared. Until now. Something moved. Not physically. Not tangibly. But behind the wall, there was a pull. He approached, his boots silent on the cold stone. "Vaelric?" Garn asked, more sharply this time. Vaelric pressed his hand against the blackened marble. The wall pulsed, just once. Then, "Why do they still try to make you kneel?" He froze. It was not a hallucination. Not like the ancestral voices. This wasn't old or decayed or expectant. This was now. Alive. Curious. Tired. It slid into him like breath on skin, unfamiliar but not hostile. He whispered, "Who are you?" The voice didn't answer. Instead, there came a soft echo of a hum. Broken. Faint. As though she were humming to herself. His heart twisted in his chest. "Vaelric." This time, Garn's tone was edged with warning. But Vaelric ignored him. He leaned closer, palms splayed against the wall. "Are you her?" The hum broke off, like someone gasping through a bruise. Then, "You, listen." His breath caught. "Yes," he whispered. She was behind this wall. The mute girl. The sacrifice. The one they said had no howl. But she did. It just wasn't made for ears. And he had no howl either. Only this. Whatever this was. "I hear you," he said. "Then don't forget me." The wall pulsed again. Then silence. Not the dead kind. Not ancestral. A waiting kind. Vaelric stepped back, pulse thudding like drumbeats in his throat. Garn stared at him as though he'd gone mad. "She spoke," Vaelric murmured. Garn frowned. "The wall." "No," he looked back, voice lower. "The girl. The mute one." "She's not mute," Vaelric said softly. And for the first time in his life, the silence around him felt invited. That night, he dreamed again. But not of ancestors. Not of fathers and mothers and bone-marked curses. He stood on a field of ash. The sky was red. In his arms, a body. Her body. Blood soaked his tunic. Her silver hair spilled down his arm like threads of moonlight. The broken moon hung above them, split and bleeding. And in that vision, the silence didn't scream. It mourned. He woke before dawn, hand clenched around the bone staff. His heart, for once, was not filled with fear, but with the echo of a voice that hadn't been born from blood. Chapter 3: The Bone-Tuned Chains. The room breathed with the dead. Not in the way of ghosts, which came softly. This was louder. Constant. 100 broken voices echoing in the marrow of the stone, crawling beneath Lyssandra's skin like insects beneath frost. The bone resonance chamber was buried deep beneath Thorfell Citadel, past the gray-ash corridors and down the spiral of the Whisper Stair. No windows. No candlelight. Only the glow of ancient bone, wolf femurs and fractured skulls embedded in the walls like stars frozen mid-howl. They pulsed faintly when the silence thickened, which meant, always. She sat with her back against one of those walls now, legs folded, hands bound in front of her with rawhide and silence. Her collar had been removed, but only because it was no longer needed. The room itself was the cage. She hadn't spoken aloud in days. But still, her head rang. Some of the embedded bones cried softly. Some muttered old lullabies. One had been singing the same name for hours, Saren. 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 She didn't know who that was. But she knew it was not for her. The bones weren't speaking to her. Not really. They were calling for someone, anyone, who might still listen. The ache in her spine had worsened since the first night. At first she thought it was from the position, always sitting, rarely allowed to stretch. But now she realized it was the walls. Or rather, what they remembered. She was hearing too much. That was the problem. The room didn't just contain broken howls. It wanted her to hold them. And she was starting to. One of the bones began keening in the low hum of a mother's mourning. The sound went through Lyssandra's skin like needles, threading through her ribs. She turned her face toward it. "Stop," she whispered. It didn't. She closed her eyes. She could feel the echo inside her teeth. Then footsteps. Sharp, light, afraid. Elsha. The girl came every few nights. Or hours. Lyssandra no longer knew time in this place. The tray clattered softly against the floor, the sound of thin glass and careful hands. Elsha's voice trembled. "I brought water. And dried plum." Lyssandra didn't move. Her mouth was dry, but her mind was drier. Still, the words came out as if they'd been sitting at the edge of her tongue for days. "The prince who doesn't howl," she murmured. Elsha froze. Lyssandra tilted her head toward her. "Who is he?" Elsha's fingers went slack. The glass rattled. Lyssandra didn't need her sight to know the girl's expression, wide-eyed. Frozen. Afraid. "You shouldn't ask that," Elsha whispered. "Why not?" "He's cursed." A pause. "Like me?" Lyssandra asked. Elsha didn't answer. The girl picked up the tray and left the food behind, fleeing through the narrow gate as though she might catch fire if she stayed too long. Silence returned. The bones hummed. And Lyssandra leaned her head back against them, wondering if their stories would ever run out. They didn't. That night, the scraping began. Metal on bone. The shuffle of measured boots. A dozen footsteps and one colder, slower, more deliberate. Severin. His thoughts walked into the chamber before his body did. So obedient now. Good girl. The guards came with tools. Curved needles. Blackened bone fragments soaked in ink. A spool of wolf gut thread. And a harness. Lyssandra remained still as they bound her to the wall. Severin stood before her like a priest preparing a shrine, his golden eyes soft with admiration. "You're adjusting," he said. "You can feel them, can't you?" She didn't answer. He crouched beside her, brushing a finger under her chin. "Your silence used to be defiance," he murmured. "Now it's refinement. Useful. Noble." Her voice came low. "Useful for what?" He smiled. "You'll help us fix a broken kingdom." The guards moved behind her. Gloved hands exposed her back, bearing the pale column of her spine. Cold air rushed over exposed skin. Lyssandra tensed. Severin's hand remained on her jaw. "You've been listening," he said. "That much is obvious." She said nothing. "But you're still listening wrong." The first needle went in. She gasped. A fragment of bone was slid beneath her skin, between the vertebrae. It burned, not with fire, but with memory. The moment it touched her nerves, screaming filled her head. Not her own. A howl of a child being dragged from a den. The second needle. Another scream. This time a soldier's last cry as his throat was ripped open. The third. A mother, begging not to be claimed. She twisted, throat tight, breath caught. Severin held her gaze. "We're threading them in," he said. Hollowed wool bone, etched with the echo of real deaths. "When they settle, your hearing will expand. And perhaps, finally, refine." "I already hear everything," she spat. "No," he said gently. "You hear everyone. But not him." Her heart skipped. The bones sank deeper. She trembled. And then, the fourth shard. "If I were immortal," the voice said, low, aching, "I would choose silence." Every time. It wasn't Severin. It wasn't the bones. It was him. Vaelric. Not speaking aloud. Not thinking consciously. But dreaming. And in his dreams, he didn't howl. He grieved. Tears pricked Lyssandra's blind eyes. She didn't understand why. But something in that voice. Not a roar. Not a command. Just a sigh. A soul sigh. It cracked something in her, deep in her ribs. She began to sob. Not from pain. But from recognition. Severin rose slowly, wiping his gloves on a black cloth. "She's almost ready," he told the guards. They left in silence. She remained bound to the wall, bones beneath her skin, shivering. That night, the chamber went quiet. Too quiet. Even the embedded bone fragments ceased their songs. But Lyssandra lay there, shaking. Because she could still hear him. And he wasn't screaming. He was weeping. In sleep. In secret. And she? She wept too. But not alone. Chapter 4. The Wolf Without a Crown. The floor beneath Vaelric's boots breathed like a dying animal. Stone shouldn't breathe. Bone shouldn't sing. And yet, as he stepped into the throne hall of echoes, the air itself twisted into voices that didn't belong to the living. His ancestors awaited. Not as shades or spirits, but as pressure, as legacy, as condemnation etched into marrow. He didn't flinch when the doors sealed shut behind him, nor when the room swallowed light, drawing the chamber into shades of bone and frost. Then the first voice came. It wasn't words. Not yet. It was a growl of absence, a space where a father's howl once reigned, now echoing like a wound that hadn't scabbed. Still without a pack, the silence accused. Then the next voice, sharper, colder. His grandfather's intonation, remembered through rituals, not love. You carry a name and nothing else. You sleep beside your staff like it's a mate. You speak of choice, but all we hear is fear. Vaelric didn't move. The fragments of bone in the ceiling above glowed red, reacting to the presence of ancient authority. With each syllable, they vibrated, as if remembering who had built this throne and who had failed to claim it. He swallowed the fire in his throat. "I will not mark wolves like cattle," he said softly. "Not for a crown. Not for you." "Then why were you born?" He said nothing. Not because he lacked an answer, but because the answer would never satisfy ghosts. From the far end of the hall, Severin emerged, draped in midnight gray, his wool-bone medallion swinging like a pendulum with every step. "You speak too loudly for someone who's never howled," Severin said, amused. Vaelric didn't look at him. The elder man's voice dropped. "I warned them. That grief births weakness." "Is that what I am?" Vaelric asked, voice calm. "Grief?" "No," Severin said. "You are nothing. That's the problem." He circled Vaelric slowly. "No mate. No marked wolves. No blood spilled in your name. Your father bled kingdoms for us. And you? You bleed in dreams." Vaelric's hand tightened on the fractured bone staff. Severin's eyes gleamed. "They are preparing to name Lord Tavric as heir. He's half feral. He has a howl. I have restraint. You have shame." The echoing voices of the ancestors surged, as if feeding on their discord. Severin tilted his head, listening to the walls. "They approve," he whispered. Vaelric turned, sharply. they're dead. And yet, Severin murmured, they have more teeth than you. Vaelric's breath trembled, not from fear, but from what came next. From what he would have to do if he stayed here a moment longer. So he turned and left. He didn't wait for permission. Let them scream. Let the halls weep for the king they didn't have. He didn't go to his chambers. He didn't go to the training fields. He went down. Past the marble floors of the palace, down beneath the vaulted tombs where the stone grew older and colder with every step. He walked the length of the chamberless spine, a hallway no one named aloud, because it led only to one door. A door with no handle. The entrance to the Bone Howl vault. She was behind it. He didn't know her name. Only that her silence had burned into his ribs. Only that when the moon cracked and the wind stilled, her breath had been the only thing that moved. He raised the bone staff and struck the ground. Once. The floor rang with dull resonance. He waited. Nothing. He struck again. This time, something answered. Not a word. Not even a breath. Just a vibration. Faint, but deliberate. He lowered to one knee and pressed his palm to the stone. "Are you awake?" he whispered. No sound. But the air changed. He tried again. "I don't know if you're listening. Or if you're dreaming. But He paused. "I hear too much sometimes. Like my blood's too loud in my ears. Like I'm trapped in a hall of dying kings and none of them will shut up." He almost laughed. A low hum throbbed beneath his fingers. The floor had changed temperature, warmer. "I don't want to be like them," he said. "I don't want to howl because I'm told to." His voice cracked. He hadn't expected it to. "I don't even know if I could." The hum responded again. Slightly stronger. Like someone breathing through bruised lungs. Then a whisper. It didn't come through the wall. It came from within him, caught behind his ribs. "Then don't howl. Speak." He closed his eyes. "You can hear me, can't you?" he asked. Silence. Then, "I hear too much, too." He leaned closer, resting his head against the cold stone. "I'm not like them. Neither am I. I think they want me to break. They already broke me." His throat tightened. "I don't want to be king." "Then don't be." "I don't know what I want." Silence. Then, gently. "Want to be free." He exhaled. A sharp, shaken breath. "I don't know your name," he said. "But if you can hear me, please don't close yourself." The hum paused. Then pulsed. Like a heartbeat. He sat there for a long time, back against the wall, the bone staff across his knees. Not speaking. Not howling. Just breathing. He thought she was sleeping again. Until she whispered, "Your silence is the only sound I want to keep." Then came a crack. Not from her. From beneath them. The stone trembled. His eyes widened as the wall shivered, bones inside creaking like old timber. The ancient marrow embedded in the vault began to glow faintly. He stood abruptly, stepping back. Down the corridor, Severin watched from the shadows, his expression unreadable. "Their connection has begun," the old wolf murmured. He smiled. "Then the kiss of the mark won't be far behind." Chapter 5: The Whispers of Severed Vows. The chains were silk this time. Not metal. Not bone. Not even enchanted leather soaked in ashroot oil. Silk. Soft as breath. Stained a dark crimson that shimmered like blood beneath candlelight. Lyssandra didn't trust it for a moment. Severin Vaendar never used softness unless he meant to make the blade beneath it sharper. She stood in the center of the blood-veiled chamber, her arms bound loosely before her, posture relaxed by design, not comfort. Around her, the drapery hung from the ceiling like slaughtered wolves turned to velvet. The room pulsed with the kind of silence that remembered violence. Severin stood before her in ceremonial garb, black robes with silver thorns embroidered into the hem, a chain of bone fragments resting along his collar. His smile was kind. His mind was not. "She is ready to bite. Good. Let her taste before she tears." He poured 2 goblets of shadow wine. One for himself. One for her. He didn't ask if she wanted it. Lyssandra did not drink. She held the goblet, feeling the warmth of it bleed into her fingers. "Do you know what they used to call this chamber?" Severin asked, voice soft, inviting. "Before the wars. Before the contracts." She did not answer. His mind spoke louder than his mouth anyway. The room of bridal silence, where unwilling mates learn to hum. He moved closer. "They called it the Red Mouth." She tilted her head. "Because of what was spoken?" she asked. He smiled. "No, because of what was swallowed." She still didn't drink. Severin's smile deepened as he circled her like a man walking a trap he had already sprung. "You've adjusted better than expected," he mused. "The bone resonators in your spine haven't rejected. You've begun to integrate their fragments." Lyssandra said nothing, but her heartbeat told him everything he needed. "You've heard things," he murmured. "Dreams. Names. Echoes of wolves you've never met." She closed her eyes. The chamber's low vibration pressed into her bones like a pulse. In the distance, the sound of weeping bone began again, the faint groan of spirits long silenced but never erased. He stepped closer, breath whispering across her cheek. And one voice in particular. She flinched despite herself. That pleased him. "Do you know what you are, Lyssandra Dreemir?" he asked. He didn't wait for her reply. "You are a jar with a crack in the seal. A vessel no one wanted. And yet, you hold more than any of us." He raised a hand. Behind him, two bone-robed attendants approached, each holding a scroll made of pale skin parchment. "This," Severin said, unrolling one, "is the lexicon of severed vows, a fragment of the ancient Howl law once used to bind the first Omegas to their kings. It was banned after the Moonbreak War." Lyssandra opened her eyes. Severin smiled, sensing her interest. He was counting on it. "I offer you a choice." She raised an eyebrow. "To be silent and die in usefulness. Or to open your ears fully, to become what you already are and let your howl be shared." He leaned in. "Don't you want someone to listen to you? Truly listen." Lyssandra exhaled slowly. She did want that. Gods help her, she did. But not from him. She tilted her chin upward, voice steady. "I want freedom." Severin's eyes sparkled. "And what is freedom to someone made of listening?" he asked. "You do not want silence. You want echo." A voice returned. She let her mouth curve. "Barely. I'll consider it." That made him pause. "But only," she said softly, "if I hear his bone voice again." He blinked. "The prince." Lyssandra tilted her head. "You offered me resonance. That includes choice of frequency." Severin stared at her. Inside his mind, thoughts twisted like smoke. She believes he's her savior. That will make the ritual cleaner. Let her want him. Wanting makes them obedient. Aloud, he said, "Of course." She lowered her lashes. "Once more," she said. "That's all I ask." Severin nodded to the attendants. They moved to the back wall of the chamber, drawing a circle of silver powder. They chanted in a tongue older than the moon court. The walls began to pulse, deep red veins of sound and memory forming lines in the stone, converging above Lyssandra's head like a crown of marrow. The bone filaments in her spine vibrated in sympathy. Pain kissed her neck. She clenched her teeth, breathing through it. Then connection. Not noise. Not thought. A bridge. She stepped into it willingly. Her body remained in the chamber, still bound in silk. But herself, her awareness, walked forward, into shadowlight and smoke. The bone dream realm. Here, the world was forged from ash and howl. Trees grew from shattered ribs. Water ran black and thick with memory. Moons, multiple, fractured, hung above like cracked eyes. And at the center of it, he stood alone. Vaelric. He didn't see her at first. He was facing away, standing in shallow water, hands at his sides, head tilted as if listening to something too distant to catch. She tried to move closer. Her steps left no mark, but the dream shifted around her like breath catching in a throat. He turned. She saw him. Truly saw him. Not through his thoughts. Not through echoes or breath. But the curve of his mouth. The pain in his eyes. The blue glass gleam of his gaze under broken stars. And something inside her shook. Vaelric's eyes widened. He took a step toward her. She whispered, "You." But before the word finished, the dream began to crack. Fissures split the world. The moons bled. From beyond the veil, Severin's voice returned. "You've had enough." No, she tried. But the dream was already unraveling. Vaelric reached for her. She reached back. Fingers almost touched. Then, nothing. She collapsed back into her body in the blood-veiled chamber, gasping. The silk around her wrists was soaked with sweat. Severin stood above her, smiling like a god who'd just broken a soul. "You see," he said softly. "Wanting makes you obedient." Lyssandra didn't speak. But she no longer looked broken. She looked like someone who'd just seen the only thing she could never unsee. And somewhere, deep inside, she began to whisper to herself, "If I must burn to reach him again, then let the blood catch fire." Chapter 6, First Glimpse Through Bone and Blood. There was no door. No sky. No ground. No time. The bone-soul dream bled like an open wound, colorless, scentless, pulsing with a heartbeat that didn't belong to her, yet beat behind her ribs as if it had always been there. Lyssandra stepped forward, barefoot upon nothing, the world shifting like liquid shadow beneath her toes. She wasn't breathing, but she felt every inhale, every gasp, every tremble belonging to someone else. Then, there he was. Vaelric Thorfell. Not the distant echo. Not the voice behind walls. But him. He knelt in the center of a shattered circle of throne pillar fragments, hunched over the splintered remains of a crown carved from obsidian and silver. His hands dripped red, not from wounds, but from something older, something internal. His knuckles were buried into the cracks of the floor, as though he was trying to hold the entire world together by force alone. And he was saying her name. No, breathing it. Lyssandra. Her feet moved without thought. The hum between them tightened, pulling, vibrating in a way no one had ever taught her, but her bones instinctively recognized. She reached for him. The space shrank. With each step, his pain grew sharper. She could feel it now, not just see the blood, but feel the sharp throb where bone had cracked along his right shoulder. She knelt beside him, inches away, and touched the torn fabric of his tunic. His whole body flinched. But he didn't look up. She placed her hand carefully along the break in his collarbone. Warm. Real. She gasped. It wasn't just the injury. It was the echo of it. The way his body had held the pain long after it should have healed. He whispered again. "You're not real." "I am," she murmured. His head jerked toward her then. Eyes the color of frozen sea foam. Wide. Haunted. Awake. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice raw. "They'll use you. They'll break you." She tilted her head, brushing a thumb gently across the blood at his jaw. "You're bleeding for a crown you never wanted," she said. "And I'm screaming into walls that never answer." For a moment, neither spoke. They didn't have to, because something moved between them. Not a thought. Not a word. But a string, invisible and thrumming, like the gut string of an ancient instrument, tugged taut between two aching bodies, finally tuned to the same note. He leaned forward. So did she. When their foreheads touched, the hum turned electric. No fire, no light, just bone against bone, memory folding into memory, breath syncing with breath. "You don't belong in this place," he said, almost shaking. "This dream wasn't meant for you. I didn't invite you." Her lips brushed his ear. "You didn't have to." His hands hovered at her waist, fingers curling without pressure. "I'm not safe," he whispered. She smiled sadly. "Neither am I." He inhaled, mouth just barely grazing the corner of hers. "I don't want you to hear what I think," he breathed. "You'll burn." "Then let me burn," she whispered. He kissed her. Or maybe she kissed him. It didn't matter. The world held its breath. Until it shattered. Something sliced through the dream like a serrated hook, tearing the warmth, the clarity, the resonance into 1,000 jagged shards. Vaelric recoiled, clutching his temple. She screamed. Not from within, but from without. Her body convulsed even as her soul tried to stay tethered. Cold hands yanked her back, ripping her from him like skin from flesh. And then, pain. Real. Blistering. Searing. In the waking world, Lyssandra's body twisted, suspended by chains soaked in moon silver and tightened across her spine. Her arms were locked behind her, every tendon screaming. The mirror-alt corridor was no longer silent. It echoed with her voice, her real voice. A cry torn from throat and marrow alike as Severin slowly tilted a vial of liquid moon blood and dripped it into her ears. 1 drop. She screamed. 2. She bucked against the bindings, the silk torn away, her bare back arching. 3. She choked on air that no longer felt hers. Her scream echoed through the corridor, bouncing off mirrored bone slabs, and Severin, standing beneath the bone frame arch, watched her like a scholar pleased with the result of a calculated incision. "Let it in," he said softly. "Let it hollow you." Blood poured from her nostrils, her mouth, her ears. But she did not black out. She couldn't, because part of her was still in the bone dream. Still with him. Still kneeling in that broken throne circle. Still whispering his name. Vaelric. Vaelric, I hear you. Vaelric, I'm not afraid. His voice echoed, faint and terrified, back through the tether between them. Lyssandra, what did they do to you? Let go of me, let go of her. Then silence. Severin snapped his fingers. The mirror bone platform shifted. A groove opened in the floor. Take her, he said to the attendants. Chain her for transport. To where, my lord? One of them asked, nervously watching the blood still dripping from her ears. Severin smiled without warmth. To the blood-bone conditioning room. He turned, cloak sweeping behind him like smoke over a pyre. If the prince wants to hear her cry, he said dryly, then let him really hear it. As Lyssandra hung in the quiet, blood-streaked and burning, a single name whispered through her clenched teeth. Not his. Not Severin. But the boy she'd touched in bone and dream. The only one who'd bled before he'd kissed. Vaelric. And somewhere, far above the cold stone, far from the bindings and screams, a bone staff fell from a prince's trembling hand. Chapter 7. Bone fused and forsaken. The chains this time were not silk. They were bone. Carved, heated, polished to a gleam that reflected the torchlight of Bloodbone Hall like ivory made to mock warmth. Each link had been engraved with an ancient howl, pulled from the death throes of Thornfell's oldest kings. Lyssandra lay atop the altar, naked spine pressed against the cold, etched stone. Ankles locked. Wrists spread and bound. A spiral of blood chalk circled the slab beneath her, pulsing with a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. Not anymore. A hiss of metal on metal echoed in the chamber. Ress, the bone conditioner, approached with a tray of syringes. Inside each, Howl fragments, liquefied shards of dead wolves' final cries, distilled into glistening ink. Severin called it enhancement. Lyssandra called it invasion. I don't bite, Ress said mildly, hands wrapped in fine black gauze. Unless you do first. She didn't answer. Her lips were cracked. Her eyes were dry. Her hearing, her real hearing, was flooded. Echoes. Reverberations. Whispers from walls, floor, ceiling, from the altar beneath her and the bone script carved along its rim. We were weapons too. We held for kings who never remembered our names. You will forget your name too, girl. The first syringe slid into her shoulder. Pain unfurled like fire stitched with wire. Above, in the observation chamber, Vaelric watched through a translucent bone mirror. His fists trembled where they gripped the rail. Every convulsion of her body echoed in his throat like a swallowed scream. She's not resisting, Ress noted. She's enduring, Severin corrected, arms folded beside Vaelric, gaze cold. That's different. Vaelric's jaw tightened. You said it was conditioning. This is torture. It's transformation, Severin replied. No wolf becomes more by remaining whole. The second injection entered her lower back. Lyssandra's body arched. She didn't scream, but her ribs shook like something caged inside her was fighting to get out. Vaelric turned sharply. She's not ready. She was born ready, Severin said. What she wasn't born with was choice. That's what we give her. A purpose. Vaelric's staff cracked the floor. And what? You think that justifies this? He snapped. You're turning her into something we can't control. She already is something we can't control. She's a girl, Severin. She's a focal point, Vaelric. A pause. A bone-sunk convergence of howls we've buried for generations. And she's finally starting to sing back. Below, Lyssandra gasped. Blood welled from her nostrils, ears, thighs. The third needle went in, directly above her navel. It didn't just hurt. It unraveled. And suddenly, the voices changed. No longer just echoes. They became thoughts. Not just names, but memories. Not hers. Severin's. A boy kneeling beside a silver mirror. A priest behind him with a hot blade. A voice whispering, "You were never meant to lead." Then silence. Permanent silence. His howl removed. Cut out. Ritualized. Lyssandra saw all of it. Heard all of it. And through her shuddering breath, she began to laugh. Not with amusement, but with grief. And rage. She choked. You wanted a howl so badly, you had to steal mine. Severin stiffened. Vaelric's breath caught. She was looking straight through the bone mirror. Through him. At him. And then her voice broke. I didn't want to hear all of you, she whispered. I wanted to hear him. Vaelric moved without thinking. He slammed his fist against the bone wall. Enough, he shouted. You're ripping her apart. Good, Severin said calmly. That means the bindings are loosening. Vaelric turned toward him, eyes burning. She's not yours to break. Severin met his gaze with something colder than cruelty, certainty. No, he said. She's yours to mend. After she shatters. Vaelric looked back at the chamber. Lyssandra lay still now. The final injection had already been administered. Her mouth opened, lips cracked and red. A sound tried to form. Not a howl. Not a scream. But a name. You said, she whispered, barely audible, you'd let me hear you. Tears slipped from her blind eyes. Not everyone else. And with that, she collapsed. Vaelric's body shook. He turned away from the mirror. He did not speak again. Not that night, but long after Severin left the chamber, and the guards went to drink off their guilt. Vaelric remained. Alone. Watching the stillness of the girl who had asked to hear only him. It was nearly dawn when he moved. The guards at Bloodbone Hall never saw him. Only the glint of his bone staff and the scent of broken protocol. Inside, Lyssandra's body hung limply from the chains, blood crusted down her thighs and ribs, her head slumped forward. He approached quietly, carefully. Hands shook as he cradled her, undid the bindings, lowered her into his arms. She was light. Too light. And warm. Too warm. He murmured her name. Her eyelids fluttered. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing against her cheek. I'm here, he whispered. I'm sorry. Her lips moved. He leaned closer, expecting nothing. But what he heard was a name. Not his. Severin. His entire body went still. She stirred in his arms. Asleep. Dreaming. Repeating. Severin. His jaw locked. He held her tighter. Not with tenderness now, but with fire behind his ribs. Because he knew what Severin had done. He had burrowed into her mind. Twisted the thread. Claimed the dream space they had once shared. Vaelric rose with her in his arms, cloak wrapping around them both. He would take her away. Hide her. Protect her. Even if she no longer remembered who she was meant to reach for in the dark. And as he disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, Lyssandra's voice echoed once more, softer now. Severin. And the word burned like poison on Vaelric's skin. Chapter 8, The Escape That Shouldn't Be. Snow whispered louder than footsteps in the hollow moon arch. Even muffled by stone and mist, Lyssandra could hear the frost crackling under their boots, the way Vaelric's breath hitched with each stare, his muscles strained to carry her. His arms wrapped tightly around her frame like he feared she would vanish into bone dust if he loosened his grip. She wasn't fully conscious. But she wasn't dreaming either. Her skin burned, and her spine pulsed with every bone-fused whisper stitched into her marrow. They sang now, screamed, even an orchestra of dead voices clawing to be heard through her flesh. Vaelric's voice broke through the noise. "Hold on," he said softly. "Just hold on." She tried. She truly did. But the pressure inside her head split like a cracked horn, and suddenly she wasn't hearing him anymore. She was hearing everything. Guards 3 floors above, shifting their weight, metal against metal. A patrol at the west wing adjusting a blade. Even farther, someone muttering, "Did you hear something?" She clutched at Vaelric's tunic. "They're coming," she rasped. He paused on the catacomb stairs, heart pounding beneath her ear. "I know," he said. "But the passage through the hollow arch. They'll cut us off," she whispered. "Before we reach the garden." His grip tightened. "I'll fight." "No," she breathed. "You can't." He looked down at her, eyes full of heat, grief, guilt. She touched his chest, the place where no Howl had ever been. "I can hear your heartbeat," she said. "It's louder than any howl." They reached the hollow moon arch, an open corridor of jagged stone veined with frost and forgotten sigils. Beyond it, the broken runestone garden lay in pieces, shattered monuments to old gods and failed oaths. Freedom shimmered on the other side like frostlight. Then her body spasmed. The world tilted. Her knees buckled, and Vaelric nearly dropped her. The voices screamed. She collapsed from his arms, landing in the snow, convulsing, temples burning, ears ringing with so many thoughts she no longer knew which were hers. "They're here," she choked. "I'm pulling them in." Vaelric dropped beside her, frantic. "I'll carry you." "No." Her hand shot out, fingers trembling as she yanked the broken cloak chain that tethered them together. Vaelric's eyes widened. "Don't." The clasp snapped. The bond unraveled. She rolled from his arms with a cry, sliding down the frozen embankment of the arch into the shattered hellstones below. The fall was short, but brutal. She landed in the circle of ruined monoliths, breath knocked from her lungs, her body folding inward like a dying flower. Vaelric skidded after her, but not fast enough. Boots slammed into the snow all around them. Steel unsheathed. Wolfbone sigils flashed. Severin's guards. Prince Vaelric Thorfell, barked a beta commander. "Step away from the sacrifice." No one moved. Then came his voice. Cool. Composed. Drenched in practiced outrage. "Severin." He stepped through the guards, robes pristine, golden eyes glowing like polished bone. "What is this?" he demanded. "You dare abscond with an active conduit?" "A living vessel." Vaelric rose to his feet, expression unreadable. "She was dying," he said. Severin tilted his head, theatrical. "So you chose treasonous treatment?" No answer. "Say something," Severin hissed. Still silence. "You abducted the central wolf bond receptacle," he went on, voice rising. "You corrupted the conditioning process. You endangered the entire ritual alignment." "She's a person," Vaelric said quietly. The words fell like snow. Severin's eyes narrowed. The guards moved in. Bindings wrapped around Vaelric's wrists, thick, iron-threaded. His staff was taken. His shoulders were pressed to the stone. He didn't resist. Lyssandra lay barely breathing in the center of the stones. When the guards moved to drag her away, her hand twitched. Then clenched. Her fingers caught the hem of Vaelric's tunic. He looked down, startled. Her lips barely moved. But the words struck harder than anything Severin had thrown. "You have no Howl," she whispered. "But I hear your heart." His chest cracked open around that truth. Then she let go. And fainted. They dragged her away. Severin watched with narrowed eyes as the guards lifted her limp frame, carried her back into the shadows of the citadel. Vaelric didn't move as they pushed him to his knees, chained his ankles. He only looked once, back at the blood left behind in the snow where her body had landed. Then he bowed his head. She awoke in a room colder than the last. Worse, it was silent. The voices weren't speaking anymore. Her body felt hollowed, emptied. She couldn't move her arms. She tried to sit. She was chained upright. Before her, Severin leaned back in a bone-crafted chair, robes loosened at the collar, a goblet of silver root elixir in his hand. "You tried to run," he said conversationally. She didn't answer. "You tried to choose your own echo." Still silence. He sipped. "Well, now you're mine." She met his gaze, weak but unflinching. "I was never yours." "No," he agreed. "But your resonance is. And that's the only part of you that matters now." He stood, walked toward her. His hand curled under her chin. "I'll make you beautiful for the blood moon," he whispered. "A perfect center. A wolf core. You'll hear every howl ever made, and never remember your own." She turned her head, teeth clenched. He smiled. And left. The door closed behind him. Lyssandra exhaled shakily. She closed her eyes. Somewhere beneath the pain, beneath the silence, she still remembered how he'd held her. Not Severin. Vaelric. How he didn't flinch from her trembling. How his breath had caught when she spoke his name. And she clung to that memory like a last thread of warmth. Even as the walls began to pulse again. Even as they rewrote her marrow. Chapter 9. The Whip of the Hollow Howl. They called it the Whipstone Vault, but Lyssandra knew its real name. The wolves didn't write it in their records, didn't mark it on any map, but the bones in the walls whispered it with every drop of blood they'd ever drunk. They called it the place where names break. She was bound between two upright columns of silver-laced hellstone, wrists chained above her head, ankles just brushing the ground. The stone beneath her feet radiated a low, pulsing thrum, an ancient frequency meant to resonate directly with the markings etched into her spine. Around her, carved into the arc of the vaulted chamber, were 13 names. 13 alphas who had held their first vow in this room. 13 who had screamed and surrendered and become more or less. Now it was her turn. Ress entered like a shadow given flesh. He wore no armor, only a long robe of dark linen and gloves that bore polished bone plates. The ceremonial lash hung coiled in his hand like a sleeping serpent, its length crafted from the fused cartilage of dozens of fractured vocal cords. At its end, 13 sharp tips gleamed silver white. The hollow hell whip. Every strike wasn't meant to cut. It was meant to echo. To wake the bone ink inside her. To tell her who she belonged to. "Hold still," Ress said, as though she had the option not to. She didn't look at him. Her head was tilted up, eyes blindfolded not by cloth, but by a strip of resin-dried wolfskin, binding not her vision, but her disobedience. "I'll begin," he said. No ceremony. No countdown. Just the whistle of bones slicing the air. The first lash landed across her back with a crack that echoed off the moon's scarred walls. She didn't scream. But her body did. It arched forward, as if trying to outrun the sound. Her spine pulsed. The bone-etched contracts burned like molten ice through every nerve. And something inside her opened. Not a door. A vault. Echoes spilled out. Not hers. Other voices. Previous ones. Girls. Wolves. Names she didn't know. Pleas in languages long extinct. Shattered vows repeating in loops that never resolved. Ress waited. Watching. She didn't cry. The second lash landed. Worse. It struck just below the first, where skin was already stretched and bloodied. This one triggered a pulse that seized her lungs, made her jaw clench so hard a molar cracked. Still, she didn't make a sound. Not one. Because she knew. The moment she made a sound, she agreed. She allowed. And that was the line she could never cross. By the seventh strike, her knees buckled. Her arms nearly dislocated. The chains pulled her upright again. Each hit wasn't just pain. It was an activation. The bone ink in her spine twisted, glowed, trembled. Trying to bloom into obedience. Trying to own her. Name, Russ said quietly, as if it was an offer. Say it. She said nothing. The eighth lash curved around her hip, slashing across her side, dangerously close to the front of her ribs. Blood spattered the stone. Somewhere beyond the walls, a door creaked. Someone entered. Small footsteps. A softer voice. Don't move, Elsha whispered. She was there only for a moment. A flicker. She reached up and pressed something cold into Lyssandra's bound hand. An ice powder salve. Standard for post-conditioning recovery. Lyssandra's fingers closed around it. Then opened. The packet dropped to the floor. No, she rasped, voice shredded. You need it. I want to remember. Elsha froze. Lyssandra lifted her head barely. I want to remember what it means to be mine. The 10th lash broke skin along her shoulder blade. The 11th tore down the back of her thigh. By the 12th, she was shaking violently, her breath coming in wet gasps. Her voice a gaping wound in her chest. And still, no scream. Then, the 13th. The final blow. The one meant to seal the obedience. It struck across every prior wound. It lit her body like fire. And then she screamed. But not aloud. In her mind, in her marrow, in the space where her name had tried to hide. And that's when she heard him. A voice not from the chamber. Not from Russ. Not even from herself. But from far above, down some unspoken bond that refused to die. I can't stop hearing you. Vaelric. She choked. Then why won't you come? No answer. Just his presence, like heat in a room that should have frozen her to death. She didn't know if she imagined him, if she created his voice out of desperate hunger. But in that moment, she didn't care. He was the only sound that didn't try to rewrite her. The only voice that didn't burn. The chain snapped. Not by hand. Not by force. But by refusal. One of the links simply broke. She collapsed forward onto the stone. And didn't rise. Later, when the room was empty and Russ had recorded her as conditioned but unresponsive, Elsha returned with trembling hands and tried to clean the blood. Lyssandra stirred only once. When Elsha touched her neck. Did he come? She asked, voice raw. Elsha blinked. Who? Lyssandra didn't answer. She fell back into the dark. At sunrise, Severin stood before the throne chamber's council ring. Behind him, Russ's report lay sealed. The girl is primed, he announced. The conditioning has begun full resonance. Her resistance is no longer necessary. And the prince, a councilwoman asked. Severin smiled. Still silent. Still watching. A beat. Good, another muttered. And Severin's grin sharpened. I will convene the challengers for the Blood Moon trial. All alpha lines will send contenders. The winner. He let the pause stretch like a blade being drawn. Will claim the Wolfcore bride. Chapter 10. The Bride of the Blood Moon. The arena was carved into the ribs of a long-dead mountain beast. Some said it was once a titan wolf, slain during the first moon rupture. Others said it was never alive to begin with, that it had always been a prison for fate. Today, it was a stage. And Lyssandra stood at its center, raised atop a column of stone, dressed not in silk or velvet, but in bone. The ceremonial gown clung to her bruised frame like a cage. Ribs fashioned from silver-washed vertebrae traced her torso. Her shoulders were haloed by sharpened wishbone, her spine bared, etched with the glowing contract sigils that had been forcibly reawakened inside her. Around her neck, the bridal collar, carved from moon-burnt ivory. Its edges curved inward, decorative to the eye, but cutting into skin with every breath. Below her, the crowd of gathered wolves howled and roared and bared their teeth for their favored alphas. And beyond them, the challengers. 3 of them. Massive. Marked. Dripping in the confidence of men who had never known true failure. One wore the pelt of a black mountain lion and scars from throat to thigh. The second stood bare-chested, his skin lined with silver contract tattoos that pulsed with every heartbeat. The third wore a bone crown not unlike the one Severin had once offered to Vaelric. But it was him who stepped out last. Vaelric Thorfell. Uncrowned. Unclaimed. Unhowled. He walked like silence given shape, every movement precise, slow, deliberate. His black hair was tied back in a blood-thread cord. His tunic was soaked through the right shoulder, still stained from the wound that had not fully healed since the last confrontation. He did not look at her. Not once. Even when Severin raised a hand and gestured toward her with mock grandeur, the wolf-core bride, Vaelric did not glance up. Instead, his voice cut through the wind. "I'm not here for her." A hush swept the arena. Lyssandra's breath caught. He spoke again. "I'm here for the Howl." Severin smiled with razor restraint. "Then let the blood choose who may claim it." The gong struck. The first alpha lunged. It began in a storm of claws and blood. The mountain-scarred alpha attacked with brute force, driving Vaelric back on his heels with blows meant to crack bone. Vaelric parried with his staff, turning each strike into misdirection. The arena floor cracked beneath them. The crowd roared with every glint of fong. The second alpha joined with a roar, slamming Vaelric against the edge of a pillar, sinking his teeth into the unmarked skin just above Vaelric's collarbone. Blood poured. Vaelric did not scream. He shifted his weight and shattered the attacker's kneecap with one swift blow of the staff. The third waited. Smart. But too patient. By the time he entered the fray, Vaelric had broken the first alpha's arm and blinded the second in one eye. He turned to the final opponent with the blood of the other 2 soaking into his tunic. This one was different. Taller than the rest. Slower, but smarter. He circled. They clashed in 3 passes. The first ended in a gash along Vaelric's side. The second drove a fist into his jaw, cracking it out of alignment. The third was the one that mattered. A claw raked across Vaelric's back, not across the spine, but into the shoulder, tearing the same wound that hadn't yet healed. He staggered. Nearly dropped the staff. From above, Lyssandra's breath hitched. She didn't cry out. Didn't dare. But she whispered under her breath, voice shaking, unheard by anyone but the stone she stood upon. "If you fought for me, just once." She blinked. "I would have let them lock me forever." Vaelric didn't hear her. Or maybe he did. Because in that final strike, he drove the staff not into the alpha's chest or skull, but into the earth, creating a quake that threw his opponent off balance. Then he stepped forward and slammed his forehead into the other alpha's nose. The man collapsed. Silence fell. 1 breath. 2. Then Severin's voice rang out. "Victory is claimed by Prince Vaelric Thorfell." The wolves howled. But he didn't. He stood, panting, dripping blood, staring at the ground. Then he turned. Not toward her. Not toward the council. He turned away. And walked. Never once lifting his gaze to the bride in Whitebone who bled for his victory. They unchained her. She was escorted down from the pillar by ceremonial guards, her legs barely able to hold her weight. She didn't resist. Not until Severin came close. He leaned in, breath brushing the shell of her ear. "Congratulations," he whispered. She didn't move. "You've been one." He smiled. But not wanted. The words hit harder than any lash. She didn't flinch. Didn't weep. Only looked ahead, numb and shivering. And as Vaelric disappeared into the shadows of the archway, she felt her pulse slow. If silence was his protection, then it was now her prison. And the chains had only just begun. Chapter 11. The Bone-Marked Kiss. The room bled light. Moonburn Sanctum wasn't warm or cold. It existed beyond temperature, carved into the belly of the palace like a wound no healer dared stitch. The air pulsed with the echoes of every vow, every scream, every trembling breath ever given in its service. The stone beneath Lyssandra's back was smooth, but not soft. It was bone, layered and fused from those who had come before her, those who had been marked, claimed, and never allowed to forget. She lay still. The ceremonial robe, once draped in dignity, now pooled around her waist. Her shoulders were bare, exposed to the glowing bone lanterns flickering above. Her collarbones rose and fell with shallow breath, each movement betraying the storm beneath her skin. The blood echo altar hummed. Not from magic. From memory. Vaelric entered with the silence of a blade unsheathed. He said nothing. His boots clicked once against the altar's stone path, then stopped at her feet. He wore the victor's cloak, half swept across one shoulder, the dark fabric clinging to blood-stained armor that hadn't yet been changed. He hadn't come from his quarters. He had come straight here, because Severin had ordered it. The victor must mark his prize. The bone contract must be sealed. Her breath hitched when she felt his presence at her side. Still, she said nothing. He reached for the silver chalice on the altar's edge, moonroot elixir to numb the senses, to dull the pain. He didn't offer it to her. He set it aside. His fingers moved to her shoulder. The lightest touch. Her body flinched beneath it. She didn't fear the pain. She feared the silence. His voice, when it finally came, was a rough whisper. I have to do this. Her lips barely parted. I know. He leaned over her slowly, the scent of him flooding her senses, blood, ash, regret. The heat of his breath spread across her neck. Still, she didn't close her eyes. He did. And then, just before his mouth touched skin, she asked, "Do you see me this time?" He froze. The question hovered, naked and sharp. He didn't answer. Instead, his mouth opened. And he bit. Not a soft press. A claim. His teeth sank into her collarbone with brutal precision, puncturing flesh where the bone met skin. The pain hit her like fire, but not the kind that destroyed. It ignited. The bone ink inside her spine screamed. The howl buried in her ribs bloomed. She gasped, a sound stolen from between pain and something far darker, far deeper. The altar pulsed beneath her. Her spine arched. Her hands clenched. Her legs trembled with the aftershock of something far more than physical. And her breath left her lips in a strangled moan she couldn't have swallowed even if she tried. She wasn't just being bitten. She was being written into. Her nerves caught fire. Her mind shattered. Her consciousness bloomed outward like blood on snow. And through the echoing shiver of her own body, she heard his voice. In her head. Through the mark. Forgive me. Her eyes snapped open. But he was already gone. Vaelric stepped back. His mouth was smeared with her blood. His jaw clenched. He didn't meet her gaze. He didn't wipe the blood away. He didn't speak another word. He turned. And as he walked from the sanctum, the hem of his cloak dragged across the stone, erasing nothing. At the doorway, he paused just long enough for his words to drop behind him like a blade. "You're a weapon," he said. "Not a mate." Then he was gone. And the door closed. Lyssandra lay motionless. Blood slipped down her chest, tracing the new mark etched into her bone. Her heart pounded like it didn't know if it had just been kissed or killed. She should have wept. But she couldn't. She wasn't allowed to. Not anymore. Because now she was sealed. A bond not of love, but of claim. Of utility. Of control. The altar beneath her went quiet. Her breath slowed. Then, a whisper. Not hers. Not his. Severin. But not his voice aloud. It came from inside. "You feel it now, don't you?" Her body went rigid. He was in her head. The bone contract doesn't care who bites first. It only cares who's next. Silence. And I will be. Her stomach twisted. The next time your lips part, It won't be for the prince. It will be for me. She screamed inside her own skull. But no one heard. Because now the sanctum had claimed her too. And the altar never let go. Chapter 12, The Caged Moonflower. They called it the Moonflower Chamber, though no one ever said it with a straight face. Because it wasn't a garden. It was a greenhouse-shaped prison, all glass and carved bone filigree, built beneath the upper tower, overlooking the outer rim of the hollow citadel. Pale vines slithered up the inner walls, old king wolf vines, long extinct outside this ward, said to grow only where someone had been caged while carrying a bond they could never claim. The floor was marble, veined with silver Howl lines that pulsed faintly at dusk. And outside the glass, fields of white moonflowers, their petals wide like watchful eyes, bloomed in trembling silence. Lyssandra hadn't left the chamber since the kiss. Since his bite. Since the mark had burned her bones and redrawn her blood to answer only his howl, even when he refused to speak it aloud. Her robes had changed. The collar remained. Soft linen hung from her shoulders now, pale as bone ash, stitched with seams of silent obedience. The clothing was looser, finer, but still uniform. Still a reminder, she was owned, even if no one claimed her. She curled now beneath the largest glass arch, back against a marble column carved with sleeping wolves, her knees drawn to her chest, arms wrapped tight around herself. Her long silver-white hair hung in tangles over her bare shoulders. And beneath her fingers, the wound. The mark. Not fully healed. It never quite did. Each time Vaelric came within 10 paces of the tower, her collarbone would throb. Her spine would jolt like the bones inside her were tuning forks, and he the hand that struck them. And then, always, distance. He never came closer. Never said a word. The bond should have drawn them together. But it only echoed with every step he didn't take. She pressed her fingers harder into the scabbed bite, wincing, as if forcing it to answer her. It didn't. Only the silence did. Then, a whisper. You don't belong to anyone. Her breath caught. Her own voice, spoken hours ago. It echoed through the bond sometimes, at random, catching on the edges of broken thought like threads on thorns. She looked up toward the glass ceiling. The moon was full tonight. Of course it was. It always was when they tried to remind her what she was. The tears didn't come at first. She hadn't cried since the altar. Not when she bled. Not when they wiped her body down like it was sacred and spoiled all at once. Not when Severin whispered in her dreams, licking at the corners of her thoughts like frost on glass. But tonight. Alone. Unmarked. Marked. Unclaimed. Still tethered to the wolf who wouldn't even look at her. They came. Slow. Salted. She curled tighter and whispered into her knees. I don't belong to anyone. Her voice cracked. So why am I still waiting for him? No one answered. No one ever did. Only the hum of the vines. The faint rustle of glass petals in the dark. And the tremble. Because her body, traitorous and tethered, knew when he was near. She hated that it knew. She hated that she wanted it to. Her breath hitched again as the contract mark pulsed once, twice, then dimmed. He'd come to the edge of her ward again. And left. Again. The silence that followed was worse than a scream. Later, Elsha arrived. She brought honeyroot water, a clean tunic, and a parchment scroll she wasn't supposed to carry, scribbled with fragments of a children's Howl song. The girl tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Do you need anything? She asked. Lyssandra shook her head. Then paused. Chalk. Elsha blinked. Chalk. She pointed to the wall. I want to draw. The girl hesitated, but returned minutes later with a set of pale chalks, red, white, and bone gray, and left them without question. Lyssandra waited until she was alone. Then she knelt and began to draw. Lines. Arcs. Threaded curves. Echo paths. She didn't know what to call them yet, but they felt right. Like geography carved from sound. Like cartography of the unseen. She drew where she'd heard the screams. The deep north. the Ash Barrens, the runes that hummed in her spine every night. She mapped it all, and slowly a pattern emerged. Not in what was present, but in what was missing. Some of the lines, some of the Howl echoes she used to hear, were gone. Not faded, swallowed. A void where memory had once lived. Her hands stilled. Her pulse raced. Something was taking them. Consuming. Muting. Swallowing the wolf songs before they could even reach her bones. She stood quickly, heart hammering, body damp with sudden heat. Something in her blood turned cold. Then, the glass flowers outside the chamber began to wilt. Petal by petal. The moonflowers bent as if shamed. And then, as she watched, they blackened. From the root, a creeping stain of red, like blood poured from the earth itself. And over the sudden silence, one whisper rang out inside her skull. "You're not the only one tuned to the howl." Her knees buckled. She dropped to the floor, clutching her temples, the bond in her chest ripping like paper soaked through. "Vaelric?" She tried. But there was no answer. Just another whisper. Familiar. Too familiar. "Severin. Next time you scream, little moonflower, you won't even know who you're screaming for." And just like that, the moonflowers died. And so did the silence. Chapter 13, The Second Alpha's Claim. Iron sang in the air like something freshly bled. The iron salt dual ground was carved deep into the underbelly of the citadel, its jagged arena outlined in rusted salt blade and obsidian wolf statues. It was not a place of celebration nor sport. It was where wolves came to tear bonds. Old ones. Forbidden ones. And today, it would host a ritual not performed in over 200 years. The Bone Mark Displacement Rite. A challenge issued not with fists, but with blooded dominance. Not to win affection, but to steal it. To rip one alpha's claim from the body of their bonded and replace it with another. A ritual meant only for those cruel enough to enforce it and strong enough to survive what followed. Severin stood at the arena's center, adorned in bone silk and command. His arms were bare, runes inked along the ridges of his forearms, each a mark of ancestral claim long since stripped in public, but never truly surrendered. He raised his voice. "By right of blood and rule, by void of vow and howl, I invoke the right of displacement. I, Severin Vaendar, stand as challenger to the incomplete bond of Prince Vaelric Thorfell, by ancient law, by fractured throne." The crowd stirred. Low, confused murmurs rolled through the chamber like ash on the wind. At the far edge of the iron circle, Vaelric stood. Still. Unmoving. Draped in black that caught no light. He said nothing. His silence was a blade of its own. But the right demanded response. And when none came, Severin smiled. As is custom, should the challenged not answer, the bond is deemed uncontested. The right of the bride shall pass to the second alpha by proof of exposed mark. Lyssandra was brought out then. Dragged. 2 guards at her arms, Elsha weeping somewhere behind them, held back by stone and protocol. She wore a pale shift dress, thin, ceremonial, designed not for modesty but for display. The moment she stepped into the salt ring, the upper clasp was torn. Her collarbone bared. And beneath the arena's central firelight, the mark Vaelric had bitten into her skin glowed like a wound that refused to heal. All fell silent. Every eye turned. The contract shimmered in raw silver red, burned into skin and soul alike. A mark meant to bind. But it was fading. Because he hadn't fed it. Because he hadn't answered it. The ritual scribe stepped forward, bone scroll in hand. "If the bonded does not reassert their claim in word or blood," she intoned, "the bone connection shall break at sunset, and be available for replacement by the challenger." Lyssandra's legs trembled beneath her. But she didn't fall. Not yet. Not as Severin approached, fingers twitching like he already felt her scream through his skin. Not as he turned to face the dais where Vaelric stood, unmoving, silent, a king who would not howl. Lyssandra's mouth opened. But no sound came. Because she could feel it. That tether, the one she didn't ask for, didn't want, didn't understand, trembling inside her. If he would speak. If he would move. If he would take one step forward. She might be saved. Might still belong to him. But Vaelric turned. And walked away. Just once. No words. No backward glance. Only silence. The shattering kind. She couldn't even scream. She just stood. Under 1,000 eyes. Under the firelight. Half naked. Half claimed. Wholly shamed. Her throat choked, and in desperation, she bit down on her tongue until blood flooded her mouth. She swallowed it all. And still made no sound. Because if he wouldn't fight for her, she would not beg for him. She would not say his name. Even as her knees gave out and she collapsed into the salt. Even as the guards reached to lift her again. Even as Severin smiled. That night, the moonflower chamber was cold. Colder than it had ever been. No one came. No food. No water. No light. Until a click. The door creaked. And then he was there. Vaelric. Hair damp from rain, cloak half off his shoulders, chest rising with shallow, conflicted breaths. She didn't look at him. Not at first. She was curled in the center of the marble tiles, back to the door, body bruised, too tired to weep. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Kneeled. His arms wrapped around her from behind, suddenly, fiercely. She tensed, then melted. Even if she hated herself for it. He didn't speak at first. Just held her like something he'd been keeping caged inside himself too long. And then, "I'm sorry." Her breath hitched. He rested his head against her neck, lips brushing the fading mark. "You belong to me." She stiffened. "You said I was a weapon." He nodded, voice breaking. "I lied." Silence again. But not empty. Then, "I'm not your alpha." Her breath caught. "What?" "I'm not. The mate the bond was meant to find. That's why I didn't fight. That's why I can't." She turned in his arms, eyes wild. "You bit me. I know. You bound me. I know. Then why?" He kissed her. Not like the altar. Not like obligation. But like pain and apology melted together. When they broke apart, she whispered, "Then who am I supposed to belong to?" Vaelric's eyes closed. And in the dark, he answered, "Someone worse than me." Chapter 14, The Snowbind Punishment. The wind didn't howl in the frost-locked terrace. It bit. The snowfields stretched like a graveyard of forgotten gods, the ice beneath them thick and groaning with each gust, as though even the lake itself tried to scream through its eternal suffocation. Here, in the white abyss where no eyes dared follow, Vaelric brought her. No guards. No spectators. Just him and her and the punishment he never named. Lyssandra stood barefoot on the frost-glazed stone at the edge of the ice. Her breath came in shallow bursts, shoulders tense beneath the ceremonial robe that clung to her like a final defense against everything she didn't understand. He gave her no instruction. No explanation. Only pointed to the lake. "Kneel." She flinched. The command wasn't cruel in tone. But it was sharp. Unyielding. Her fingers trembled as she undid the first clasp. The second. The robe slipped down her arms. Exposed the still healing mark on her collarbone. Exposed everything. Cold hit her like blades, razor thin and absolute. She stepped forward. Onto the frozen lake. Knees struck the ice with a soft crunch, sharp enough to sting. The cold crawled up her spine like a living thing. Vaelric followed. No words. Only the sound of his boots crushing powder snow, the long bone staff in his hand trailing behind him like a second spine. She didn't dare look at him. Didn't dare ask why. But her voice betrayed her thoughts. "Is this because I didn't stop it?" His silence answered. She swallowed. A tear slipped down her cheek. It froze before it could fall. He stopped behind her. And spoke. "This is because I let you believe you had a choice." Then, the first touch. His staff, cold and hard, pressed to her spine. Not gently. Not cruelly. Just deliberately. She gasped. It wasn't pain. Not yet. But it knew where to hurt. He began to carve. Not with a blade, but with Howl ink laced into the tip of the staff. It burned as it entered her skin, sinking into nerve and memory alike. A symbol. Then another. Each one an unmarking, a reverse claim, meant to shatter the half-formed bond that he himself had created. Her fingers dug into the ice. She trembled, not just from the cold. Why, she choked. You need the pain, he said, to stabilize the imprint. No, she cried. You want me to suffer. He said nothing. But the next press was harder. She arched, her back bearing more of itself in the movement. A third rune burned across her lower ribs. She whimpered. His breath came behind her, steady, quiet, as though this cost him nothing. Tell me, she gasped, is this punishment or protection? Still no answer. But his hand touched the back of her neck, anchoring her in place as the next sigil was etched low against her spine. Her whole body jolted. It was pain, but laced with something else. Something too close to pleasure to be pure cruelty. Something that made her thighs tense, made her breath shake in ways that humiliated her even as she tried to fight it. Stop, she whispered, voice breaking. He didn't. She bit her lip until it bled. Until she couldn't breathe without tasting her own iron. The fifth rune burned across her scapula. She screamed. But not with words. It was a sound of confusion. Of agony. Of needing to understand why the pain hurt in such an intimate way. Her fingers slipped on the ice. Blood painted the frost beneath her knees. I don't know what you want from me, she sobbed. He paused. Then leaned close, lips at her ear. I want you to remember. Remember what? He knelt behind her, breath cold against her cheek. That you're alive, he said. Because I haven't killed you. Her whole body went still. His fingers traced the newest mark, still glowing, still raw. I let them try to steal you, he said quietly. Because I thought if I pushed you far enough, you'd break the bond yourself. She turned her head slowly, her tears no longer freezing. But I didn't, she whispered. No. And now you're breaking it for me? His eyes met hers. No. He touched her heart, just above the breastbone. I'm breaking it for me. She collapsed into the snow. Spent. Shivering. Silent. The world narrowed into white and red. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he dropped the staff. And gathered her in his arms. Her skin against his chest was snow-wet, fevered from the ink. She didn't cling to him. She couldn't. But she breathed. And when her head lolled forward, lips blue, skin pale, he looked down at her as though she were something fragile carved from his own ribs. He held her closer, buried his face in her shoulder, and whispered into the place where her mark had started it all. If you die, he choked. If you die, I won't even have a howl to remember you by. The wind didn't answer. But the moon did. And it burned red. Chapter 15, The Alpha Who Was Never Crowned. The throne crypt was colder than any place in the Frostlands. Not because of ice, but because of memory. Beneath the citadel, beneath even the Blood Echo altar, lay the place where kings went to rot, not in flesh, but in Howl. Here, their remains were not buried, but suspended in the black salt of time, their last screams etched into obsidian walls. Their crowns, broken, bent, burned, sat atop skulls hollowed out by power. And here, Vaelric knelt. Alone. Before the fractured throne of his father. No crown on his own head. No title in his bones. Just the echo of failure thick in his breath. You return, said a voice behind the dark. Not spoken. Manifested. The outline of his father's shade shimmered into existence, a specter carved from old blood and older disappointment. Regal, proud, untouched by time or regret. You were not summoned, Vaelric said. You summoned yourself, the king replied. Every time you hesitated. More voices began to rise. The old alphas. The council of dead wolves whose bones still dictated the lives of the living. You let her mark you. She was supposed to be a tool. You let her twist your howl. I have no howl, Vaelric growled. A bitter laugh rolled through the chamber like thunder. Exactly. You say it as if you discovered it. We knew. You are the quiet prince. The hollow sun. The one who needed silence to feel strong. Vaelric rose from his knees. I never asked to be born into this. And yet you were, his father said, stepping forward. You are of Thornfell. You bear our marrow. You carry our failure like skin. And now you have a choice. Vaelric didn't move. The walls trembled. Sacrifice her, the king whispered. Offer her heart at blood moonrise. Reclaim your birthright. I won't. Then choose death. Choose shame. Choose her over us. Vaelric's jaw clenched. What if I choose nothing? Then your bloodline ends. And your silence becomes our last word. He turned. And walked away. But the voices followed. Not with screams. With judgment. You are not Alpha. You never were. You were just the boy who waited too long to choose. Far above the crypt, the world grew colder. And in the blood-ice sanctum, Lyssandra opened her eyes. Her breath crystallized before her lips, every inhale searing her lungs. She was lying on stone, not smooth, but carved into jagged ridges. Beneath her back, something pulsed. Not light, not warmth, but resonance. She sat up slowly. Chains hung from the ceiling. In the distance, moonlight filtered through ice-glass windows, casting violet shadows across the floor. Her body ached. The bone mark on her collar pulsed with sluggish defiance. This was no healing chamber. This was containment. Her fingers curled. She tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Because the heat was wrong. It was inside her. And it was burning. A voice echoed through the crystallized hall. You've been chosen. Severin. Of course. She didn't lift her head. Didn't dignify him with a look. He came closer anyway. You know what this chamber is, he said. You felt it the moment you opened your eyes. She nodded faintly. The final vessel, she whispered. The one used before the blood moon. To tune the soul until it fractures. He smiled. I prefer to call it the refining room. She shook her head. You mean the breaking room. He didn't deny it. You've always had a beautiful ear, he said softly. And now, you'll have the voice of every wolf who ever died choking on silence. Their scream will pass through your throat when the moon turns red. She turned her face away. If he doesn't come, she murmured, I hope I die before you hear me sing. Severin leaned down. His lips brushed her ear. You won't. He stood straight. And when you break, when the howl turns on him, he'll finally realize what he was never strong enough to keep. He left her in darkness. And she curled into herself again. Alone. But not silent. Not anymore. Because her bones were no longer still. They were singing. And then it began. The mark on her back, etched by Vaelric's staff, meant to suppress the bond, ignited. She screamed. Not from pain. From burning. The runes glowed crimson beneath her skin, flaring out like spiderweb cracks across her spine. And within her mind, one final whisper rang out. Not Severin. Not Vaelric. But something else. Something new. The bone voice is turning inward. You will burn them all from the inside out. The sanctum shook. Outside, the moon turned the color of blood. And inside the frost-drenched cell, Lyssandra began to glow. Severin watched through the crystal wall and smiled. She's begun. Chapter 16, The Shiver That Broke the Chain. The ice had teeth. By the 7th day in the blood-ice sanctum, Lyssandra could no longer tell whether the cracks she heard were coming from the walls or her own bones. She lay curled in the center of the frozen cell, chained not by steel, but by the weight of her own unraveling howl. Every breath she took came with the echo of someone else's scream. The floor beneath her was slick with half-frozen blood, the kind that didn't clot, just wept from her skin like her body was trying to empty itself. And her back, burned as though Vaelric's marks were trying to sear their way out of her. They weren't just glowing now. They were pulsing. "Seventh day," said Russ, the bone conditioner, from beyond the frost-crusted bars. He watched with clinical detachment, noting how her spine trembled, how her fingers curled into claws against the ice. She should have broken by now. She had broken, but not the way he expected. Because Lyssandra was no longer screaming in fear. She was laughing. Soft, wet, wild, and whispering things not meant for the living. "Do you hear them?" she asked no one. "Do you hear the wolves? They want out. They want teeth. They want blood." Russ leaned in, frowning. "What do they say?" She turned her head. Her silver hair was matted with sweat, blood, and frost. Her smile was cracked. "They say I don't need him anymore." Russ stepped back. Something in the air shifted. The kind of shift that happened before a howl, before a death, before something opened. And far above, Vaelric ran. He had been denied access for 6 days. Severin had locked the sanctum with rites older than the throne itself. But rites could be broken. And he was done waiting. He stormed the upper gates, shattered the sigil chains with his staff, and descended the cracked moon corridor with blood in his mouth and something feral in his breath. "She's burning," he said aloud. "You're killing her." No one answered. They didn't have time. By the time he reached the final seal of frost bone, the scream that erupted from within the sanctum wasn't hers alone. It was everyone's. 1,000 voices. Collapsing. Devouring themselves. And hers rising above them. He struck the ice. It didn't shatter. It screamed back. A second strike. This time it bled. A third. The door gave. He found her on the floor. Naked but for the blood-veined tunic clinging to her chest, her knees drawn to her stomach, her arms clawed with her own nails. She wasn't moving. But her body throbbed. Like her heartbeat had been taken over by something not entirely hers. He dropped beside her. Lyss. Her eyes snapped open. They were glowing. Silver. Red. Moonblind. She lunged. Not to flee. To claim. Her mouth found his throat, her teeth scraping skin just above the collarbone, where wolves marked wolves. He gasped. "Don't." But she already had. She bit. Not to hurt. To echo. To reverse. And Vaelric, alpha of silence, howled. Not aloud. But inside. Because her howl didn't stop at the skin. It went deeper. It sank. Into marrow. Into the places he had buried his wolf long ago. She burned him. And when she pulled back, mouth smeared with his blood, eyes wide with feral confusion. He didn't stop her. He didn't fight. He grabbed her. Tore her down into the ice. They hit hard, back to floor, chest to chest, limbs colliding in the kind of struggle that could only end in dominance or devastation. She kissed him. Not sweet. Not hesitant. Like hunger that couldn't be named. He responded with equal force. His hand fisted in her hair. Her nails scraped his back. Their bodies moved not in harmony, but in opposition. Colliding. Twisting. Fighting for control in a ritual older than names. She sobbed into his mouth. He growled into hers. Her tears seared his cheek. His breath lit her skin. "I hate you," she gasped. "I know. You left me. I'm here now. You said I was nothing. I lied." "Why?" He held her tighter. Pressed his forehead to hers. "Because I was afraid of wanting you." She cried harder. Fists beating weakly against his chest. And still he didn't let go. "I'm broken," she whispered. He kissed her again. "You're awake." Her limbs gave out. She collapsed against him, breathing hard. And finally, her body stilled. She fainted in his arms. Blood on her lips. His howl burning beneath her skin. He pulled her close, wrapping his cloak around them both, sinking into the melting frost with her weight on his lap. He didn't say another word, because he had nothing left. But as she slept, shivering, unconscious, claimed. She dreamed. And in the dream, she stood on a throne of bleached white bone. Her feet were bare. Her hair was tangled. And beneath her, Vaelric, Severin, both dead, both shattered. She was alone, crowned, feared, and crying. "I didn't want this," she whispered in the dream. "I don't want any of it." But the moon above only bled deeper. And the crown didn't fall. Chapter 17, The Omega's Howl That Should Not Exist. The Howl Tribunal had not been convened in nearly 3 generations. It was said that when the moon last cracked red over the Ashvang Mountains, the tribunal summoned a she-wolf who had devoured her bonded alpha in his sleep. She had not denied it. She had laughed. They burned her on the bone pyre before dawn, and still, her bones were said to howl. Now, they called an Omega. Lyssandra Dreemir. The girl who had survived the sanctum. The girl who had marked a prince. The girl who should not have lived. She stood barefoot on the cold marble dais of the chamber, arms bound behind her in ceremonial gold-threaded restraint, her hair tangled down her back, her neckline torn to expose the old bite and the fresh mark that burned just beneath it. It wasn't just flesh. It was proof. She had done the unthinkable. Marked back. And no one, not the elders, not the guards, not even the priests in their stone-masked silence, looked at her without a mix of dread and awe. "Brought to order," said the first elder, voice echoing through the obsidian chamber. Lyssandra Dreemir, born to no banner, bound by no vow, stands accused of violating the Alpha-Omega sanctum by imprinting upon an unmarked alpha. The word fell like blood and snow. She didn't flinch. Second accusation, came the next voice. Willful inversion of bone order through unpermitted resonance. Attempted soul tethering. Third, said another, older voice, nearly trembling. Omega origin howl cast against full alpha lineage, an act of spiritual domination. That one got murmurs. A few gasps. The death knell was in the next line. Punishable by combustion. On the pyre. She smiled. Not softly. Not kindly. But with the kind of feral amusement that came only after you'd lost too much to care. "So," she said, loud enough for the ceiling to hear, "I'm to burn." Silence. She leaned forward. "If you're going to reduce me to ash, the least you could do is let him kiss me first." Gasps. She let her eyes sweep the chamber, mock serene. "So I can burn with the taste of him on my lips." Blasphemy, someone hissed. Another elder rose. "This is not a performance." She cocked her head. "Isn't it?" Silence fell again. Because she wasn't wrong. And that was worse than defiance. From the side gallery, Vaelric stood unmoving. He had been silent the entire time. Not a word. Not a flinch. Not when they dragged her through the snow. Not when they dressed her in the white robe of condemned wolves. But when the guards stepped forward to pull her down from the dais, he moved. A flash of black. A crack of silver bone staff striking marble. He reached her in 4 strides. And just as the guards raised their hands, a wave of force struck him. Severin's voice. Not loud, but commanding. Down. It wasn't a word. It was Howlcraft. Alpha command. Wrought from the blood of 100 devoured ancestors. Vaelric's knees hit the floor. Not from weakness. From the weight of centuries pressing down. His head bowed. Shoulders trembling. Hands clenched. And still, he tried to rise. Lyssandra looked down at him. Her wrists still bound. Her body still marked. But her gaze, her howl, was her own. And she whispered, "Will you kiss me now, Alpha?" The silence was total. Then, Vaelric stood. The floor cracked beneath his boots as he forced the command off his back like a cloak he'd never agreed to wear. He climbed the dais. 1 step. Then 2. She didn't step back. She bared her throat. He grabbed her arms, rough, unyielding. Tilted her chin. Met her eyes. "You want to die," he said, voice low, brutal. She said nothing. He leaned close. Pressed his mouth to her throat, just beneath the older mark. And bit. Hard. Her breath left her in a gasp that wasn't pain and wasn't pleasure, but surrender to something that neither word could contain. Blood welled. Heat followed. The second bond formed. And with it, silence shattered. The room shook. The elders fell back. Someone screamed. And still, Vaelric held her. His lips to her neck. His breath against her skin. "You want death," he murmured. "Then die under my lips." Her tears mixed with blood. She sobbed once, breath catching in her chest. And still, she didn't move away. Because it wasn't just pain. It was connection. Even now. Especially now. When he pulled back, he kept his hands on her arms. Her body trembled. Her knees threatened to give. But she didn't fall. Not yet. Severin stepped forward. Expression unreadable. Voice like poison snow. 2 marks. He raised his hand toward the court. She bears 2 imprints. Unstable. Dangerous. A pause. She is no longer merely a howling omega. She is now a vessel of conflicted resonance. He turned. To burn her would destroy the harmony of the blood moon rite. Another pause. But to contain her. He looked back at Lyssandra. Eyes gleaming. To use her. He smiled. She will become the blood moon vessel. She will sing the rites with bone between her lips. She will bind what no alpha ever could. Vaelric stepped in front of her, blocking her from Severin's view. But it was too late. Because the court had seen, had heard, had decided. She was no longer a girl. She was a thing. And in her silence, a single thought bloomed in her mind. This is not survival. This is another kind of burning. Chapter 18, The Collar of the Second Howl. The Black Moon Armory didn't smell of metal. It smelled of blood. Old blood. Dried into the hinges of restraint cages. Soaked into the velvet padding of collar molds. Etched into the glass mirrors lining the chamber's walls like veins trying to crawl out. It was not an armory for weapons. It was an armory for obedience. Lyssandra knew the moment they dragged her past the threshold that this was no longer about trial, or law, or justice. This was about control. About rendering something too dangerous to own into something too broken to resist. Severin didn't speak as he walked ahead. 2 guards flanked her, holding her by each arm, not tightly, but with the ease of those who already considered the fight long over. They passed rows of relics, ritual bone cuffs, silver-tipped bindings, claws molded from alpha remains. At the far end of the vault, suspended from a crescent-shaped hook, hung the object that chilled her more than anything else in this cursed place. The collar of the second howl. Black as volcanic glass, thin and elegant like a noble's adornment, but humming with the same frequency as the bindings in the pyre crypts. Lyssandra's skin flinched just being near it. It was made for omegas like her. No, for aberrations like her. The double marked. The bone broken. The howl betrayers. "You cannot be trusted with your own voice," Severin finally said. She didn't answer. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of what she might become if she didn't answer. And still, she said nothing. He reached for the collar. The metal reacted to his touch, moaned, pulsed, flickered red for a moment. This, he said softly, almost reverently, was made to silence the soul, not just the throat. He turned toward her. And for the first time since the tribunal, she saw something behind his eyes that terrified her more than power. Admiration. "You should be proud," he said. "Only one has ever worn this before." "And what happened to her?" Lyssandra asked, voice thin. Severin's smile didn't waver. She screamed until her ribs cracked. He stepped forward, lifted the collar. Lyssandra jerked back, but the guards shoved her forward again, forcing her to her knees. "No," she spat. "You want silence? Then break my tongue." He knelt before her, and gently, almost lovingly, pressed the collar to her neck. "I don't want your silence, Lyssandra," he whispered. "I want your sound when it shatters against my leash." The collar clicked shut. She convulsed. Not from pain, yet, but from the violation of the seal. Her bone marks lit up in sequence. The old mark from Vaelric, the second imprint, the forged contract scarred down her back. The collar threaded between them all, a third, unnatural master key, bypassing her body to speak directly to her Howl. She slumped. Blood dripped from her nose. Severin caught her chin, forced her to look up. "Why not kill me?" she asked. "You've done everything but." His fingers tightened. "I could kill you. Easily. But killing you means releasing you from your purpose." "And what is that?" He leaned close, nose brushing hers. "To become the most beautiful ruin the wolf blood has ever known." She spat blood in his face. It wasn't a scream, but it was enough. He wiped it from his cheek with 2 fingers. Unbothered. Amused. "I admire your defiance," he said. "But even rage has a limit." He snapped his fingers. The guards lifted her again, dragging her toward the mirror throne, a seat of silver bone and black velvet, carved with old runes and reflective plates that forced the occupant to watch herself from every angle. She struggled. They forced her to sit. One of the guards yanked down the collar of her robe, exposing the mess of bruises and burns around her neck. Then came the blood moon ring, a red band carved from a sliver of cursed lunar stone, meant to lock an imprint permanently in the flesh. Not just binding, but branding. It was placed directly over Vaelric's second mark. Severin leaned in. "Let's remind the world who you belong to," he murmured. The moment the ring touched her skin, the contract pulsed. It burned. It bled. Her spine arched violently. And in the mirrors, she watched herself shatter. She screamed once. Not loud. Not verbal. But a sound of wool cracking against glass. When it was done, she slumped forward, hair falling into her face, chest heaving. And Severin. He didn't leave. He pulled the final lever. A concealed mirror panel slid down from above, forcing her to look directly into her own face. Her eyes were hollow. Her throat was lined in bruised red and branded silver. Her collar shimmered like a noose waiting to tighten. "Look," he said softly. "See what you've become." "I see." Her voice was dry, rasping. "But you know what I don't see?" He tilted his head. "My leash," she hissed. "Because you can dress me like a beast, but I haven't submitted." He slapped her. "Not hard enough to break. Just enough to sting. You will." She stared at herself in the mirror. And smiled. Blood in her teeth. Tears in her eyes. "I am what you made me." "Good." She lifted her chin. "I'll bite through your gods." He blinked. Then laughed. "Delusion suits you." But then, everything stilled. Because in the mirror, just behind her shoulder, another reflection. Not hers. Not Severin's. But a version of her. Smiling. Dark-lipped. Eyes glowing. Voice silent but undeniable. The moon's soul echo. Her own resonance, twisted and split, formed from pain and suppressed howling. It whispered inside her mind. "Let me out. You want him dead. I want him burning. We're the same, you and I." Lyssandra's body tensed. The collar pulsed. The mark screamed. And Severin? He hadn't seen it. He leaned in, brushing her hair aside. "You belong to me now." But inside her head, another voice growled. "We belong to no one." Chapter 19. The Alpha Who Begged. The ice groaned beneath the world. The Cave of Disquiet was a hollow tucked deep beneath the frozen crust of the Citadel's outer rim, a pocket of silence carved by centuries of pressure, untouched by light, unreachable by any who didn't know how to listen. And Vaelric had always been the best at listening, even before he learned how to remain silent. He carried her through the tunnel with blood-slicked arms, one of her shackles still clinking softly against his wrist. The collar remained locked around her neck, humming like a living thing, trying to whisper instructions into her spine. But it was weakening, because he had broken its twin key. And now she pulsed like a furnace in his arms. She wasn't conscious. Not entirely. Her skin was too hot for someone so cold. Her back glowed where the branded marks had burned into bone, and the twin imprints along her collarbone beat like twin hearts, one from him, the other twisted by the blood moon ring. He laid her down upon the smoothest portion of the ice-ribbed floor. The cavern's ceiling hung low above them, slick with condensation, refracting fragments of moonlight through cracks in the glacier like shattered stars. She stirred, moaned softly. Not from pleasure. Not from pain. But from something between. "Lyssandra," he whispered, kneeling beside her. "Don't move. Not yet." Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes opened slowly, drenched in delirium, half sane, fully bound to something that wanted to devour her from the inside out. "You should have let me die," she rasped. He shook his head, brushing her damp hair back. "I can't. You're too late." "I know. You always are." "I know." She tried to sit up. Her body convulsed. The marks flared crimson, one then the other. Out of sync. Dangerously out of sync. He caught her before she hit the ground again, pulling her upright against his chest. Her lips grazed his throat, unintentional, heat trembling through both of them. He felt it. The resonance breaking. The bond fracturing from pressure. Her howl wanted to escape. But her body couldn't hold it. Not alone. "Don't fight me," he whispered. She snarled. "I've been fighting for you." Their eyes locked. The cave trembled. This was no longer about survival. This was synchronization. If they didn't match, if they didn't join, bone and spirit and breath, she would erupt. And he would die with her. So he did the only thing that might save her. He unclasped the top of her gown. Slowly, deliberately, let it fall from her shoulders. She shivered, not from cold, from remembrance. "Don't pretend this is for me," she said bitterly. "You want to bury your guilt in my skin again?" "No," he said quietly, pressing his forehead to hers. "I want to survive. With you." He removed his own tunic. The marks across his chest were faint echoes of hers, ghosted resonance patterns that had tried to bond to her and failed. But tonight, they might succeed. If they touched again. If they shared a howl. If they bled not from pain but from union. He guided her down to the smooth stone shelf at the center of the chamber, half ice, half moo metal, pulsing with forgotten rites. Her body arched against his. She gasped. Their marks glowed. The cave shook. And the ceremony began. There were no words for what happened next. Only breath. Only heat. Only connection. Every movement between them was a war against instinct, a plea for synchrony. They had to move together. Breathe together. Howl together without losing control. His mouth found her throat. Not biting this time. Marking with silence. Her hands clutched his back, fingers slipping into the grooves of his shoulder blades as if trying to pull him deeper. Her hips rolled beneath his. He groaned. Their howls began to rise. Each one timed. Measured. Perfect. Until she screamed. The cave cracked. Ice above them fractured like shattered ribs, echoing down in deafening crescendos. He held her tighter, harder, pressing her hips to the earth, mouth to her chest, breathing her in, not to claim, but to match. "I can't," she sobbed. "I can't hold it. You don't have to. I'm breaking." "So am I." She looked at him. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth. And he whispered, "I'm not an alpha anymore." She blinked. "What?" "I was never crowned." Her lip trembled. He touched her collar. "This power, this title, none of it ever fit. But you heard me. Even when I had no howl to give." She cried harder. "What do you want from me, Vaelric?" He leaned down and wept against her skin. "Everything." She pulled him back to her, and they trembled together, unraveling and remaking something older than blood. Then, silence. True, perfect, resonant silence. The cave calmed. Their marks dimmed. The howl settled. She collapsed into his arms. He kissed her temple, held her tighter than he'd ever held anything. And for once, neither spoke. Not until the air turned cold again. Not until they heard the ceiling shift. They looked up. The opening had iced over. Light no longer pierced through. And then, Severin's voice. It echoed through the sealed stone like a curse carved into time. "You want to howl together?" he asked, amused. "Then I'll give you eternity to echo." The ice sealed shut. The air thickened. And all around them, the cave of disquiet began to close. Chapter 20. The Tomb That Echoes Love. They had stopped counting time after the third day. In the cave of disquiet, there was no sun to mark the passing hours. No wind. No drip of water. Only breath. Only blood. And now, even breath was beginning to fail. Lyssandra lay curled beside Vaelric, her skin bathed in cold sweat, her lips cracked and pale. The marks across her body had begun to rupture, not like wounds, but like fissures where the Howl tried to claw its way out. Her pulse fluttered beneath her skin like a moth drowning in sap. Vaelric cradled her in silence. He had long since discarded his tunic, wrapping it around her trembling frame. His own body was marked with burns, some fresh, some remnants of the synchronizing ceremony that had nearly killed them both. He had whispered every name he knew for mercy. None had answered. And Lyssandra hadn't opened her eyes in nearly 12 hours. But she still breathed. Barely. Her head lay in the crook of his arm, her breath barely fogging the air. "Stay," he whispered, his voice rough from dehydration. "Please." She twitched. A finger. A sigh. But no words. Her throat was too dry. Her body too spent. He brushed his fingers over her collarbone, where his second mark had turned the color of bruised ash. Once it had burned with resonance. Now it pulsed weakly. An echo of a bond losing its anchor. His breath caught. He could feel it. The thread unraveling. She was dying. Not from injury. Not from violence. From absence. There was no food. No water. No source of heat but each other. And her omega body, wired for endurance, not starvation, was shutting down. He looked at his hand. Then clenched it into a fist. The choice wasn't noble. It was necessary. With a sharp breath, he drew his dagger from his belt, bone-handled, still smeared with dried resonance powder, and slashed his palm open. The blood came fast. Hot. Dark. He pressed the wound to her lips. She didn't move. "LSS," he whispered, voice cracking. "Drink." "Nothing." He pressed harder. Her lips parted slightly. A drop slipped between. Her throat convulsed. He felt it. She swallowed. Slowly. Painfully. But she did. A flicker of color returned to her cheeks. Not much, but enough. He breathed out a broken sound. Relief. Grief. Something caught in between. "If you die," he whispered, lips brushing her hairline, "I'll break every vow they ever forced into me." His voice dropped. "And I'll paint that cursed throne with my blood. With yours, if I have to." Something like a laugh left her throat. Ragged. Dry. Barely a sound. He pulled back to look at her. Her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, really looked, like she was seeing through the fog for the first time. And then, she smiled. "You keep saying you're not an alpha," she rasped. "I'm not." She lifted a hand. Shaking. Barely able to rise. Her fingers brushed his jaw. "But you're the only one who feels like a wolf." His breath hitched. He closed his eyes. And that was when she tried to lean in. To kiss him. It wasn't sensual. It wasn't seductive. It was instinct. Goodbye. But she couldn't reach. Her strength gave out halfway. She sagged forward. He caught her, heart racing. And without hesitating, he lifted his bleeding hand again. Brought it to his own mouth. Then bent down and pressed his lips to hers. Not to take. To give. A kiss of blood. Of breath. Of everything he had left. She gasped faintly against him. A heartbeat stuttered. Then steadied. He held her through the silence. His forehead pressed to hers. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Because this wasn't love like the songs. This was love like a grave. He didn't know how long they lay there. A minute. An hour. A lifetime. Until the floor moved. Not with tremor, but with heat. He shifted, pulling her closer. And beneath them, the ice began to crack. A vein of crimson light opened through the stone, thin as a hairline, but pulsing. Then another. And another. Until the cavern floor glowed like a map of ancient bones. Lyssandra stirred weakly. He looked down. She was staring at the ground. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't know. Then he heard it. Not sound. Not howl. But resonance. From far, far below. A voice not heard in centuries. Old as the moon pact. "You would give blood for bond." The voice echoed through their spines. "But will you give soul for salvation?" The cracks widened. A tunnel began to form. Ribbed in frostbone. Lined with pulsing red veins. A single breathless pathway. A choice. Her fingers found his. They were cold. So was his. But they were together. The voice spoke one last time. "If you would walk the path of no return, then rise, Omega, and burn the gods who failed you." They looked at each other. No fear. No hope. Only a single truth. If they stayed, they'd die. If they followed the voice, they might still. But they'd do it on their own terms. Vaelric pulled her up. She leaned on him, legs barely working. And together. Bleeding. Bound. Broken. They stepped into the light. And the tomb sang them forward. Chapter 21. The Path of the Bleeding Pulse. The earth beneath their feet was alive. Not with roots. Not with breath. But with howl. Lyssandra staggered as the floor trembled beneath her. Each step forward sent pulses of heat rising through her bare soles, as if the bones beneath the ice and stone were crying out to her, recognizing something they had not felt in centuries. Not a wolf. Not an alpha. Not even a mate. But an answer. The corridor that had opened beneath the cave of disquiet wound downward into the dark in veins of glowing crimson and frost white. The artery of the Howl, Vaelric whispered, an ancient place spoken of only in shattered verses and muttered warnings. A place where the blood of the first shifters was said to have melted the mountain itself. And it was singing to her. Every heartbeat echoed louder than the last. Not hers. Theirs. The fallen Omegas. The ones who tried to contain what could not be caged. The ones who burned from within, their own resonance turning against them until their souls shattered and were buried beneath the silence of shame. The deeper they walked, the more the walls around them whispered. Red stone turned to obsidian, laced with spirals of claw marks and scrawlings in Old Howl script. Lyssandra's fingers brushed them in passing, each one sang a name. Each one was dead. "Do you hear them?" she murmured. Vaelric walked just behind her. "I hear you." They entered the final chamber. The stone flame cavern. The ceiling arched impossibly high, lost in darkness. In the center of the vast space, a massive altar rose from the ground, scorched, cracked, and engraved with thousands of palm-sized prints. Each one a blood impression. The handprints of Omegas who came here before her. Every one of them had burned. Lyssandra approached it slowly. Each step an ache. Each breath a dare. And then, the altar pulsed. Recognizing her. Responding. Vaelric moved to her side, his hand outstretched, but she stepped beyond his reach. "No," she said softly. "This is mine." She placed her palm against the center stone. The cavern screamed. Not with voices, but with memory. The walls glowed. The marks across her body erupted in heat. Her knees buckled. Her eyes flew open, unseeing, and yet she saw. The future. Not hope, but horror. She stood at the peak of a mountain. Blood rained from the sky. The moon was split in half, weeping silver fire. And she held Vaelric's body in her arms. Dead. His eyes open. His throat torn by her teeth. Around her, the tribes bowed. Not in reverence. In fear. She opened her mouth in the vision. And swallowed the last of his howl. The image shattered. She collapsed backward onto the stone, her body on fire, screaming, convulsing. Her bones rattled in her skin. Her voice cracked the cavern ceiling. Vaelric was there in an instant, catching her. Lyssandra. She clawed at him. No, don't touch me. He didn't let go. Her nails dragged down his chest, drawing blood. I saw it, you were dead, I killed you. His arms locked around her. Breathe. I will destroy everything, I'll burn the moon, I'll rip out the sky, I'll kill you. Then kill me. She froze. His voice broke. But do it now. While you still love me. She stared at him, tears and blood streaking her face. I don't want to be that thing, she whispered. That creature. That monster. You're not. But I will be. Silence. Her hands trembled in his. If I ever become her, if I ever stop knowing who I am, promise me you'll stop me. He touched her lips. I won't let it get that far. She shook her head. No. Promise me. He didn't speak. Then. I will, he said, voice soft and shattered. I will stop you. She closed her eyes. Thank you. He leaned down, brushing his forehead to hers. And if I do, he whispered, I'll make sure you die in a kiss. She sobbed, collapsed against him, and the altar beneath them went still. For a breath. For a moment. Then. It shuddered. A tremor rose through the cavern. The artery began to glow red-hot. From every mark on the wall, light spilled. And a force pulled. Lyssandra screamed as her body was yanked backward, flung into a spiral of crimson fog. She reached for Vaelric, but the air warped between them. Vaelric. He lunged, but hands of shadow dragged him the opposite way, down into a chasm splitting the stone. Lyssandra. They disappeared into opposite dark. The howl split. The resonance snapped. And all that remained in the chamber was the blood. Chapter 22. The Omega's Return in Chains. They paraded her like a trophy. Or like a warning. The Bloodcrow steps leading up to Thornfell's Grand Court had seen executions, oaths, coronations, and betrayals, but never had they seen something like this. An Omega returned in chains. Not iron. Not bone. But silver. 5 links of it, glowing faintly with frostlight, looped through enchanted rings driven through her wrists, her ankles, and one through the hollow just above her collarbone, pierced straight through Vaelric's fading mark. She didn't walk. She was dragged. Behind Severin. Her body left a thin trail of blood where the chains bit into her. She said nothing, because she could not speak. The collar hadn't been removed. But worse than silence was the howl. Not hers. Theirs. She could hear the entire court's resonance roaring through her skull. Every doubt. Every disgusted thought. Every ancient law trembling in their bones. Her own howl, once wild and defiant, had been muffled into a distant memory, still flickering, but fading beneath the suffocating others. She was a vessel. An echo chamber. And still, she kept her eyes open. She would not be blind for this. Severin led her to the center platform, stopping just beneath the arch of the 3 wolf statues, the trinity of dominance, obedience, and submission. The irony tasted like iron in her mouth. She was forced to kneel. Not gently. The guards wrenched her chains taut, making her fall hard against the red, stained stone. Her knees hit with a crack. And she did not cry out. Severin turned to the gathered wolves, court alphas, bloodline elders, minor packs, even the bone priests of the Thorn cult. They stood on all sides, silent as the air before a storm. Brothers, Severin said, voice ringing across the steps, and sisters of the wool-born flame. He lifted one hand. Behind him, Lyssandra bled slowly onto the dais. This Omega, he continued, once thought to be a vessel of sacred resonance, has committed the greatest heresy of our time. A murmur passed through the assembly like the stirring of ash. She sought out the ancient artery. Awakened the lost howl, forbidden by covenant. Another wave of reaction, this time mixed with awe and dread. She broke the seals laid by our ancestors. She violated the natural order. She dared to bear not one, but 2 unpermitted bone marks. And now she returns with blood soaked in fire, with no howl of her own, but with ours still inside her. A moment of stillness. Then, "Burn her," came a voice from the eastern steppes. "She's not an Omega anymore," cried another. "She's something else. She's a threat. Burn her. Burn her for the moon." Lyssandra kept her head bowed. Her breath came in shallow tremors. Her collarbone throbbed beneath the chain. She could feel it pulsing, like it knew what was coming. She didn't move. Severin raised both hands, quieting the court. Then, he unsheathed a blade. Not large, but curved and ritual-made, carved from black fong bone, tip-coated in gleaming salt steel. He stepped behind her. The wind shifted. And for the first time, her breath caught. "Today," Severin said, "we sever what should never have been formed." No, the whisper wasn't hers. It was his. Vaelric's mark. A final echo. Severin placed the blade to her skin. She felt it slide across the outline of Vaelric's bite, the second one, the one left not from dominance, but desperation. She gritted her teeth. Then, the blade pressed down. Sliced through. She jerked, mouth opening in silent scream as blood poured across her chest, soaking her torn robe, painting the stone beneath her in crimson threads. Still, she did not scream his name. Not once. She clenched her jaw until it cracked. And in the agony, she bit her own wrist. Hard. Until her blood met her tongue. Until her howl lit up in her marrow. And then, only then, she spoke. One line. Spat through her own blood. "I seal him away," she gasped. "With my howl." Severin paused. Looked down at her. Her lips were red. Her chin trembled. But she was smiling. In pain. But in power. And then, he knelt beside her. His hand touched her shoulder. And his voice went low. "Good girl." She shuddered. Not from shame. From fury. "Now," he whispered, leaning so close she could feel his breath against her ear, "from this moment forward. You howl only for me." She didn't answer. But the mark bled faster. And her collar hummed louder. The crowd began to chant again. "Blood to the moon. Burn her. Make her howl." But Lyssandra had already gone somewhere else. Inside. Where her own voice still lived. Buried beneath the silence. Waiting. Watching. Smiling. Far to the north. In the frozen rimlands of the ash reach, beneath a sky storming with silver ash, a figure crawled from a pit of bones. Vaelric. Half frozen. Coated in blood and dust. His howl gone. His body barely alive. He collapsed at the base of a broken cairn, lips blue, fingers frostbitten. And yet, still breathing. Voices surrounded him. Not Severin's. Not Lyssandra's. Older. Stranger. "You carry the stain of an Omega. You carry her fire. Will you burn for her? Or will you kill her first?" His eyes opened. And he whispered, "I don't know yet." Chapter 23. The Ceremony of the Hollow Bride. They dressed her in white. Not the color of purity, but of bone. Every chain that wrapped around Lyssandra's wrists and collarbone had been bleached from the ribs of wolves long dead, symbols of obedience forged into adornments. Her hair was brushed until it no longer looked like hers. Her lashes painted silver. Lips touched with ash-mixed rouge, as if even her breath now belonged to the moon. She was washed in silence. Hands touched her with practiced reverence, as one would handle an offering, not a woman. She was bathed in oils that smelled of bitterroot and broken promises, dried with linen bearing the sigils of extinct alpha lines, and clothed in a dress of stitched gauze that left her skin open to the cold and the ceremony both. No one met her eyes. No one spoke her name. They called her only by one title. The Hollow Bride. When the doors of the Temple of Red Hollow opened, the gathered wolves gasped as one. And she walked into their hunger. 1,000 gazes devoured her as she was led, barefoot, down the central bloodstone aisle. Flowers, dipped in crushed salt, were thrown before her steps. Every petal that touched the floor withered into dust. At the head of the altar, beneath the spine arch of the moon tyrant, stood Severin Vaendar. He was not crowned. He didn't need to be. Every eye followed him. Every voice bowed to his howl. He extended a hand toward her. She didn't take it. Guards forced her to kneel. The blood basin at the altar's base glowed faintly, wolf blood, centuries thick, still pulsing with resonance. Lyssandra's knees sank into the viscous red. Her fingers twitched as the heat soaked into her bones. Her collar reacted instantly, the hum of containment growing louder, harmonizing with the ambient hellcraft swirling through the temple. Severin raised his voice. "Tonight," he proclaimed, "we seal the blood moon vow." The wolves responded in perfect unison. "By Fong, by flame, by the fire of the Forsaken. She who bears the howl of many shall carry the sins of all," he continued. "She who drank the echo of the lost shall burn for our future." Lyssandra didn't look up. She couldn't. Not because of the chains, but because her body was fracturing. The resonance inside her was no longer a whisper. It was a howling storm. All the voices she'd absorbed. All the pain she'd inherited. Every dead omega buried beneath the false peace of the wolf courts now screamed from within her marrow. She heard them. Saw them. They stood behind her, circling the blood basin, transparent, bleeding, broken. Release us. Burn them. Become the end. And somewhere, faint, trembling, her own voice whispered, "He's not coming." She smiled bitterly. "I know." A priestess approached, carrying the ceremonial Fong, a dagger carved from a firstborn alpha's tooth. The blade was designed to pierce the soul, not the skin. With it, the temple would carve the final seal into Lyssandra's chest, branding her as the core of the reverse howl. A living weapon. An eternal bride to the blood moon. But just before the blade touched her, she raised her head, looked right at Severin. Her pupils were blown wide. Her lips cracked. And she smiled. "You win," she whispered. He blinked. She leaned forward and kissed him. Not gently. Not weakly. She kissed him like a curse. Her lips moved against his, bloody and broken, and she spoke into his mouth. "I marry you in this life. And you marry death with me in the next." The crowd cheered. They thought it submission. They thought it triumph. They didn't see the hate in her eyes. The void. The slow, deliberate way her fingers curled behind her back into the shape of the old signal, the last message of an omega before full detonation. Severin caressed her cheek. He said softly, for her ears alone, "Good girl." She didn't answer. She was looking beyond him. Beyond the arch. Beyond the stone. Beyond the moonlight that had just fractured across the far windows. A shadow stepped onto the outer edge of the platform. Not from a gate. From above. From the highest ridge of the temple's back wall, where none but wolves born in storms dared tread. He stood there, wrapped in a cloak of torn wolfskin, his arms bare, his chest marked in ash, his eyes gold and burning. Vaelric. Lyssandra's breath hitched. She blinked twice. But he didn't vanish. He wasn't a vision. He was real. And his voice, hoarse, cracked, and unmistakably alpha, rang out across the temple like a prophecy reborn. "Let her go." Severin stiffened. The crowd silenced. "She is no bride of yours," Vaelric growled. "And you have no claim over those bones." He stepped forward, unarmed, but undeniable. Lyssandra's lips parted. For the first time in weeks, her howl returned to her throat. She didn't cry out, but she exhaled 3 words. He came back. And the temple began to shake. Chapter 24. The prince returned without a name. The doors of the Moon-Throne Hall had never been forced open before. Not in this generation. Not in the reign before. They weren't meant to open. They were meant to receive, a chosen alpha, cloaked in lineage, bearing the weight of ancestral bone and blessing. But that night, they opened to fire. Vaelric entered not as a prince, not as an heir, but as a man who had ripped off his title like a festering wound and stepped through the wreckage with nothing but rage. He was still bare-chested, still coated in remnants of ash and dried blood. The cloak of wool hide wrapped around his shoulders billowed behind him like a banner of defiance. His hair was unbound, tangled by wind and storm. His hands were empty, except for the jagged shard of a once sacred lunar feather, now hardened into a blade. And at his throat, where once the royal bone brand pulsed beneath the skin, there was only a scar. Still smoking. Still burning. A wound where legacy had once lived. "I renounce," he said, voice sharp enough to silence every gasp. "I reject the blood of Thorfell. I sever the Howl of my line." He raised the blade and sliced open his royal wrist. The blood that splattered across the moon-forged floor wasn't red. It was silver. Too bright. Too old. The kind of blood that didn't belong in the veins of a man, but in the marrow of a monster. Severin stepped forward, expression unreadable. "You would disown the throne," he said slowly, "for a girl who no longer remembers her name?" Vaelric didn't look at him. He turned his gaze toward the dais, where Lyssandra knelt, her body still bound in ceremonial chain, her gown soaked in blood, her hair slicked to her forehead in wet clumps. She didn't move. She barely breathed. But when he stepped closer, she whispered, "I'm not her." His heart cracked, but he did not falter. He dropped to his knees before her and folded her into his arms. Her body was cold, too cold. He pressed her against his chest, where the echo of his second mark still vibrated beneath the skin. "You are," he said, voice breaking. "And even if you're not, I'll split this moon in half to build you a new name." Her lip trembled, but her eyes didn't open. He turned his head toward the court, toward the wolves who still stood in stunned silence. "I do not return to be king," he called out, voice ragged. "I return as her resonance." He stood, lifting Lyssandra with him. "She was made your vessel," he continued. "But I—" He raised the moon's aard blade. "I was born your echo's undoing." Gasps rippled through the hall. Some fell to their knees. Others drew back. Severin's face remained perfectly still. "She's cursed," the regent said. "And you walk straight into her fire." Vaelric smiled. And it was not kind. "If I burn," he said, "let it be as the flame she wakes with her howl." He turned back to Lyssandra. And then, in front of everyone, he reached up and tore the bridal chains from her wrists. The crowd flinched, as if it were blasphemy. But he didn't stop. He stripped away the blood-drenched gown layer by layer, gently, never leering, never cruel. Not to expose, but to free. With each ribbon torn, each clasp broken, he whispered her name like a vow. "Lyssandra, Lyssandra, Lyssandra." And when the last layer fell, he wrapped her in his wolfskin cloak, tucking it around her like armor. "You are not their bride," he murmured. "You are mine. Not as possession. Not as prize. But as the only song I ever wanted to hear." Her fingers twitched against his chest. Her lip parted. But before she could speak, a howl cracked the air. Not hers. Not his. Severin stepped forward, slow and smiling. "You came too late, Prince." Vaelric turned, blade gleaming. But Severin raised a hand and pointed to the moon outside the fractured skylight. It had begun to shift. Once white, now flushed with the first blush of blood light. "3 nights," Severin said. "That's all she has left." He stepped onto the dais and gestured to Lyssandra's trembling body. "She's not just marked. She's a vessel now. Her resonance is collapsing inward. When it finishes," he tapped his chest, "she'll take us both." Vaelric's grip tightened on the blade. "She won't." Severin chuckled. "Are you sure?" He turned to the court. "Because I hear her howl already." Vaelric looked down. Lyssandra had gone still. But her heart beat too fast. too loud. And in her breath, something else stirred. Not her. Not anymore. The moon outside turned darker, and the shadows inside the moon-throne hall began to move. Chapter 25. The Sleep of the Howling Bride. The tower had no doors. It hadn't needed them in generations. Moongrave Tower, oldest spire of Thorfell, had been sealed since the age of the Howling King, the ancestor who had ripped his own throat open trying to silence the voices inside his skull. They said his ghost still cried beneath the stone when the wind turned east. Vaelric did not believe in ghosts. He believed in echoes. And Lyssandra was full of them. He had carried her through dust and ash and blood, his arms wrapped around her like he feared the world would steal her the moment he blinked. And maybe it would, because she hadn't woken. Not since the temple. Not since the moon turned red. Her skin had cooled but hadn't stilled. Her marks, his marks, shimmered in and out of visibility like dying stars. Her breath came in stutters. Her heartbeat echoed too loud or too soft. And her mouth sometimes moved in sleep as if whispering to someone not there. He laid her in the center of the chamber on the stone dais once used to anchor the maddened kings. She didn't even flinch when the cold touched her spine. The tower walls were lined with bone salt, designed to dampen howls, muffle magic, contain madness. It wouldn't heal her, but it might slow her unraveling. Night after night, he sat beside her and tried to speak to the girl who no longer heard him. The first night, he simply held her hand. He watched the moon rise through the crack in the tower ceiling, watched it drift toward its full shape, watched it bathe her face in silver that no longer reflected in her blind eyes. He kissed her fingertips. "I'm here." No answer. The second night, he pressed his lips to her collarbone, to the place where his bite once lived. Now dark, scabbing, the flesh raised and twitching with fever. He bent and kissed it again, poured a whisper into it. A hum, a fragment of howl. She shuddered faintly, and then fell still. The third night, the bleeding began. Not from wounds, but from within. Her skin leaked red like she was melting from the inside out. Her breathing fractured. The marks glowed bright. Vaelric stripped off his tunic, tearing it into wet cloths, dousing her in snowmelt. She moaned in her sleep. Not in pain. In chaos. As if 1,000 wolves were crawling through her mind. He grabbed her wrists, held her down gently, and for the first time, howled. Low. Not loud. A hum through his chest, pressed against her ribs, vibrating into her bones. The first bone kiss. Her body jerked. But the bleeding slowed. Just a little. So he did it again. And again. And again. By the fifth night, his voice was raw. His lips were cracked. But he still pressed them to her fevered skin. Her cheeks. Her neck. Her eyelids. Each kiss a prayer. Each whisper a confession. You used to hear me. You said mine was the only voice that didn't hurt. You said I sounded like home. His voice broke. Now I speak and you're gone. He ran his fingers through her sweat-drenched hair. I'm going to keep calling. Do you hear me? He bent, mouth against her brow. I'll howl until I have no voice left, Lyssandra. His hands trembled. I'll empty myself until something in you remembers. By the seventh night, he had stopped leaving the room. He didn't eat. Didn't sleep. He kept her body wrapped in warmth, fed her melted snow between shallow breaths, pressed kisses against every inch of her cursed bones and whispered lullabies from a boyhood he'd never had. I don't want to be king. He told her everything. I don't want to be an alpha. He wept into her skin. I just wanted one person to stay. He kissed the corner of her mouth. You stayed, LYSS. His head bowed. You heard me when no one else did. He closed his eyes. And now you're gone, and I don't know how to scream loud enough to bring you back. He bent to her lips again. Just one more kiss. But before he could touch her, she stirred. Not softly, not sweetly, but wrong. Her hand caught his wrist. Tight. Too tight. Her nails dug into his skin. He blinked. Her eyes opened. Not blind. Not silver. Not hers. There was no softness there. No confusion. Just a smile. And it was cold. "You kissed the wrong bride, Vaelric," she whispered. His heart stopped. She sat up slowly, chains dragging behind her. "I'm not the girl who listened anymore." He reached for her. She tilted her head and grinned. "You wanted to empty yourself into me," she murmured. "Then you should know." She leaned in. Her lips nearly touched his. "I'm very, very good at swallowing what destroys." Chapter 26. The Bride Who Devours Her Alpha. When Lyssandra opened her eyes again, the moon over Moongrave Tower was the color of clotting blood. She lay still for a long time. Too still. Her breath didn't stir the air. Her chest rose, but it didn't fall for what felt like an eternity. Vaelric had dozed beside her, his head resting lightly against her side, his arms still cradling her like a vow. He didn't notice when her pupils dilated, didn't see how they glowed faintly silver beneath the layers of blindness, no longer blind, no longer hers. She turned her head and looked at him. And smiled. Not cruelly. Not sweetly. But with the calm of someone who had finally remembered what they were made to do. "I see you," she whispered. Her voice was different. Lower. More centered. Like something ancient had found its mouth inside her. Vaelric stirred. "Lyssandra." She sat up. Smooth. Controlled. She tilted her head. And her gaze, no longer wandering, focused with absolute precision on his throat. "You have too many voices in you," she said gently. He blinked, still disoriented. "What?" She touched his chest with her fingertips, tracing lightly down the center line of his sternum. "They're all fighting to be heard. Grandfather. Father. The failed king. The crown that never kissed your head. The prince who begged. The wolf who ran." He froze. She smiled wider. "I'll quiet them for you." Before he could answer, she straddled him. Fast. Fluid. His back hit the cold stone. She leaned down, mouth to his throat, and whispered, "Let me make you silent." Then she bit. Not gently. Not sweetly. Not like a lover. Like a wolf. The reversal was total. Her teeth sank into the curve just beneath his jaw, where pulse met vulnerability, where Howl lived behind the skin. Her fingers dug into his shoulders, holding him down not to restrain, but to feel the shudder beneath her palms as she released the rebellious howl. It wasn't a scream. It was a pull. His body arched. Not from pain. From something deeper. Something like suffocation. The howls within him, every inherited bone mark, every unspoken vow, began to tremble violently. He felt his own voice begin to detach from his chest. He gasped, but didn't push her away. Instead, he whispered, "Do it." Her eyes flinched. He kept speaking. "You want to rip it out?" His voice was hoarse. "Then do it. Tear me down. Make me nothing." She growled against his neck. But he reached up and held her head there gently. "I won't stop you." Her breath hitched. His blood ran warm down her chest. "You think I'm not hurting," he said. "I hurt every time you stop being you. I hurt every time I see you disappear behind someone else's hull." Her hands trembled. "You think I'm not in pain," she hissed. "I think you've forgotten you can ask me to stop. I'm not her. I know. I'll kill you. Then do it properly." She pulled back. Her mouth bloody. His neck bruised and open. And yet, he smiled. Soft. Real. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're not screaming," she whispered. "You're not begging." His chest rose and fell slowly. "You're not gone." She stared at him. Frozen. Her lips parted. And then she began to cry. Still kneeling on his lap. Still straddling him like a conqueror. Still covered in his blood. But her shoulders began to shake. And when she tried to speak, all that came out was, "I can't stop hearing them. I know. They won't leave. I'll stay even if they do." She leaned down again. but not to bite. This time, her forehead pressed to his shoulder. She wept silently against his skin. And he held her. No commands. No demands. Only silence. The kind she could choose. And in the quiet that followed, the tower felt still again. For a moment. Until she pulled back. Her voice changed again. No longer broken. No longer trembling. Steady. Too steady. She stood. Walked barefoot to the shattered window. Her bones glowed faintly beneath her skin, resonance leaking like cracks in porcelain. I hear the palace, she said calmly. He rose behind her. What do you mean? She didn't turn. Her hands curled around the windowsill. I hear them all. She tilted her head. And they're screaming my name. The blood moon rose behind her. She looked luminous. Untouchable. Unhuman. And she smiled. They all belong to me now. Chapter 27. The Throne That Burns with Her Name. The sky had turned the color of burnt veins. And the wolves of Thorfell knelt not because they were commanded, but because they could no longer stand. Their howls had been swallowed. Their instincts stolen. They knelt as hollow creatures beneath a queen they never chose, but who now lived in the marrow of their bones. Lyssandra Dreemere stepped into the bloodlight throne room like a prophecy uncoiled. She wore no crown. No veil. Her body was bare to the waist, the remnants of her bridal chains melted into ash that clung like dust across her hips. Her spine glowed with resonance sigils, flickering beneath her skin like fireflies caged in glass. Each step she took hummed. With power. With mourning. With the ache of every howl she had consumed. Behind her, a dozen ceremonial guards dropped to their knees. Their blades fell from nerveless fingers. Their eyes clouded over with silver. And still, she walked forward. At the far end of the throne hall, seated upon the seat carved from the jawbone of the first alpha, was Severin. He did not rise. He simply smiled. Not surprised. Not frightened. Almost proud. I thought you'd come with teeth, he said, voice low and velvet. I thought you'd come to kill me. Her footsteps didn't falter. But look at you, he continued. The bride who outlasted her wolves. The girl who swallowed their gods. He opened his arms. Come then, Lyssandra. Come sit beside me. We'll rule together, fire and bone. She stopped 5 paces from him. And tilted her head. No, she said softly. The throne doesn't need a ruler. He arched a brow. She stepped forward once more. The throne needs to burn. Before Severin could respond, she inhaled. And howled. It wasn't loud. Not in the way wolves understood. It didn't echo across the stone. It didn't resonate through blood. It simply split. The air. The walls. The bones. The bloodlight throne room cracked from the base to the rafters. Chunks of stone tumbled from the ceiling. Fountains of red silver howl light erupted from the floor. Wolves screamed, clawing at their own throats, their voices trying to re-escape from her grip and failing. Some fell. Some wept. Some simply faded, their wills extinguished like candles under her breath. And yet, from the far edge of the chamber, a staggered breath. A step. A whisper of broken bones scraping marble. Vaelric. He limped into view, half collapsed against the frame of the shattered hall, blood smeared across his mouth. His shoulders were bare, his hair tangled with ash. He leaned on the ruined remains of his bone staff, each movement rattling the silence. Her hull ceased. Her head turned. Their eyes met. Not as mates. Not as Prince and Omega. But as ends of a prophecy neither wrote. He took one more step. His knees buckled. Still, he moved forward. She stared at him, unreadable. He called her name. Not in desperation. In remembrance. Lyssandra. She didn't blink. Didn't flinch. She simply stepped forward. And crushed the staff beneath her heel. The sound cracked through the room like thunder. He collapsed to one knee. Panting. Shaking. Still alive. She stood above him. The girl who once reached for him in silence. Now the woman who ruled with scream. "You taught me freedom," she said, "and then abandoned me without teaching how to stop." He lifted his face. Didn't argue. Didn't beg. He reached for his chest and slowly unfastened the straps of his ruined tunic. His skin was pale beneath the blood. Scarred. Marked. Branded. But the center of his chest still held the echo of her name. Her second mark. Faint, but present. He bowed his head. "If you must take me," he said, "then devour me." His voice was almost gone. "Take my last howl with you." She stared. Something in her hands trembled. Something in her mouth twitched. Then, she stepped past him, her footfalls echoing, each slower than the last, until she reached the throne of bone. She looked at it, then turned her back on Severin, on Vaelric, on the court. She faced the moonlight streaming through the broken roof. The blood moon was rising. It cracked along its center, like a wound that had waited too long to burst. She raised one arm, let her hand rest on the armrest, and then she sat. The throne hissed beneath her skin. The air burned. Her bones screamed, and the entire kingdom howled in pain. She did not flinch. She did not blink. She did not speak. But when she opened her eyes, the cracks of the blood moon mirrored in her pupils. She smiled faintly and whispered, more to herself than the room, "Let it be known, I am the bride of wolves, and your end." Above her, the moon shattered. Chapter 28. The last howl before the moon shatters. The red hollow citadel cracked when she screamed. Not from the pitch, not from the power, but from the truth. Because Lyssandra Dreemere did not scream for vengeance, or for love, or for mercy. She screamed to end things. And in the echo of her final moon howl, every wolf collapsed. One by one they fell. Eyes rolling, mouths open. But no sound came out. Their howls, once sacred, sovereign, violent, had been devoured. They now lived inside her ribs like relics, howling only when she allowed it. And right now, she allowed nothing. Lyssandra stepped down from the crumbling blood throne, barefoot, the skin of her soles glowing faintly from the ambient resonance. Her arms were slick with light. Her eyes had gone completely white, opalescent and without pupil, but somehow still saw everything. Severin choked. He tried to stand, but his knees gave out. The markings on his throat, those alpha-honed calligraphy strokes carved by generations, began to blister and burn. He clutched his neck. "No," he gasped. You're not meant to control me." She raised her hand. A single gesture. His voice vanished. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She only walked forward, and with a single finger, pressed into the hollow of his throat. His bones sang, and then shattered. He fell forward, convulsing, before crashing to his knees. Please," Severin rasped, lips trembling. She didn't blink. "This isn't revenge," she whispered. She leaned in. "This is correction." She slid her hand across his marked skin and ripped. Not flesh, but the imprint of his howl. It tore like silk. He screamed without sound, buckling into himself, becoming less with every second. Lyssandra didn't look back. Her eyes lifted to the shattering moon above. Her voice returned, cold and stripped of longing. "No one owns the night's song." She turned and walked through the howling ruins of the throne room. Across the city, in the broken rise of the Mooflame spire, a body hit the steps. Vaelric Thorfell rolled once, twice, and landed in a heap before the Bloodwell basin. He coughed. Red filled his mouth. His bones ached like they didn't belong to him anymore. His howl was gone. His breath stuttered. But his eyes still searched for her. High above, from the spire's peak, Lyssandra's voice echoed. "You let me hear myself once." Her silhouette shimmered against the dying sky. "But now I can't hear you." He tried to stand. Failed. He crawled, step by step, his limbs dragging through the red. Not toward survival, but toward a single goal. He pulled something from beneath the ruins. His broken staff. Snapped in two. Markings carved with pain. Her name etched in blood across the shaft. He placed it before her feet. Then looked up. "I brought you a gift," he whispered, panting. "A gift?" She tilted her head. "This is a sacrifice?" He smiled through bloodied teeth. "No. This is permission." She paused, bent slightly, and picked up the bone. Her fingers trembled. "This is asking," he continued, "for you to kill me." Her eyes narrowed. "You came here to die?" He met her gaze. "I came to let you choose." She looked at the bone in her hand, then at him. Slowly, she reached for his throat. Her fingers pressed softly to the hollow where his pulse fluttered. The same place she'd bitten before. He didn't resist. "If I must die," he said, "let it be in your last breath." She closed her eyes. Tears fell. But her hand didn't stop glowing. "I hate you," she whispered. He didn't flinch. She leaned closer. "You made me like this, and called it freedom." He nodded. She trembled. And then she screamed. Not aloud, but through her soul. The howl wasn't just for war. It was for surrender. For grief. For memory. And in that howl, she reached deep into both of them. And locked their howls. Together. Her moon echo spread from her chest in waves of fire. She kissed him. Forehead to forehead. Mouth to mouth. But not sweet. Not soft. It was a seal. A contract. A burning pact that said, no one commands us anymore. No one would ever hear their voices again. And no one would own them. Not even fate. Then, she began the self-burn. The forbidden ritual. The one buried beneath all blood contracts and mating scrolls. The moon's soul erosion. Her body arched, resonance ripping through her chest like wildfire. Her skin cracked. Light poured from her eyes, her mouth, her open palms. The spire shook. The sky roared. And every wolf still breathing in the kingdom fell to the ground, ears bleeding, whimpers cut short. Severin's remnants screamed. The residual howls of forgotten alphas clawed for purchase in the wind. She held Vaelric close. His body limp. Her voice shaking. "We were never alpha," she whispered, almost smiling. "We were never omega." She kissed his brow. "We were just kids they taught to scream." Then, she howled. A sound too wide to hold. Too bright to bear. Too final to forget. The tower exploded. The throne hall collapsed. The blood moon cracked into slivers and fell like knives across the land. Silence. Then, a single sound. A breath. From no one. From everywhere. Hours later. Maybe days. No wolf could tell. The city stood still. No howls. No whispers. Only the smell of smoke. And in the center of the former red hollow citadel, scorched down to bone and ruin, stood a single blackened shape. Not a body. A staff. Half burned. Still standing. Its markings nearly unreadable. Only one letter remained. Faint. Scratched through soot and blood. A single initial. L. Chapter 29. The Kingdom Without a Howl. When he awoke, the world was silent. Not quiet. Not hushed. Silent. No wolves cried in the distance. No morning chants rose from temple spires. No ancestral howls stirred the air. Only wind. And even that sounded wrong. It didn't carry the memory of voices anymore. Vaelric blinked into the dim light of a tent, the walls of which were patched together with ash-stained linen and bits of royal embroidery. The ceiling was high. The floor smelled like blood and pine. His body wouldn't move at first. His chest ached. Burned. His breath came shallow. But eventually, he found the strength to lift his hand. It trembled as it rose. And when it landed against the skin of his bare chest, he gasped. Because beneath his ribs, over his heart, the shape of a scar pulsed. Not the mark of a mate. Not the branding of a king. But the faint outline of a howl that had devoured itself. Her mark. The last kiss of a woman who had burned herself into the world and taken its voice with her. He sat up slowly. Every muscle ached. But he didn't scream. Because he couldn't. Not even a whisper. His voice was gone. Stripped like bark from a tree. His howl, devoured like all the rest. He reached for the pile of things left beside the cot. There were herbs. A cup of cold broth. And a charred, half-melted bone staff. It had once been white. Ceremonial. Heirloom. Now it was scorched black and split down the middle. His hands wrapped around it carefully. And he whispered, only to himself, only in thought. She said, the last howl belonged to me. He pressed the staff to his chest. Held it like a child. This was my crown. He didn't cry. There were no tears left. Only quiet. In the days that followed, he learned the truth. No wolf could howl anymore. Not one. They could breathe. Walk. Bleed. But their voices, their resonance, were gone. Their throats worked. But sound did not come. The alpha marks had burned from their skin. The omega bonds had unraveled. The entire kingdom had fallen into a hush so deep it echoed. Silent cradle, they began calling it. A new land born from the ashes of the old. No more thrones. No more bonded servitude. No more blood-borne leadership. No one told anyone else what to be. No one whispered commands with their bone markings. Because there were no markings left. The people gathered in a valley that had once held the remains of the old wolves, now reborn in stillness. A valley without echo. A cradle for those who remembered pain. And chose not to repeat it. Vaelric never called himself king again. They gave him a new name. Keeper of the Fire. Because he alone still remembered how to light it. He never slept in towers anymore. He built himself a tent outside the others, just beyond the last line of graves, beneath the only tree left standing after the moon had burned. At night, he sat there. Alone. Holding the staff across his lap. Listening to nothing. And dreaming of the girl who taught him everything. In those dreams, she always wore white. But not the white of virginal brides or sacred robes. She wore the ashes of the old kingdom, draped around her like a veil of ghosts. Her eyes were always closed. But her smile, it made the moon itself lean down to kiss her. She never spoke, just stood beneath the silver light and offered him her hand. And every time, he reached for it. Every time, he almost touched her. But she would turn and fade. Into cinder. Into nothing. He never screamed in his sleep. Because screaming was a thing of another life. He only woke with his hand outstretched to nothing. And went back to watching the stars. Elsha visited sometimes. She brought him tea. Bread. Once, she brought him a new cloak. He never wore it. He still kept the one Lyssandra had scorched when she died in his arms. It still smelled like her. Like burned pine. And lilac. And rain that never came. Elsha asked him once. Do you think she meant to survive? He hadn't answered. Because she hadn't left an answer. Only the silence. And the echo it carried. On the 28th night after the shattering of the blood moon, he did something different. He took a knife. Walked barefoot into the center of the burial cradle. And knelt at the mound where no grave had been dug, but where the wind always paused. He carved a single name into his chest. Slowly. Deeply. Painfully. The blood soaked through his tunic. He didn't flinch. When it was done, he traced the letters once. Lyssandra. He whispered her name with his heartbeat. Not his mouth. Not his throat. His soul. And then, he looked to the stars. He didn't ask for a sign. He didn't ask for a miracle. He only whispered in thought. If you ever wake up. If you're ever out there. No, I'm still here. Still listening. He touched the scar over his heart. Still keeping your Howl safe. Behind him, in the cradle of bones and silence, the wind picked up. And for a moment, just a moment, it sounded like laughter. Or maybe that was just the memory of a girl who had once ruled with nothing but a voice and chose, in the end, to take it with her. Chapter 30. The Mark Beneath the Ashes. The world no longer howled. Not since the blood moon shattered and the kingdom burned. Not since the wolves laid down their thrones and let silence crown them instead. But every year, when the moon cracked its light across the snow just right, Vaelric Thorfell walked alone toward the Ashvale edge. The others didn't follow. They knew better than to disturb the man with no voice who spoke more with the tilt of his spine and the weight of his silence than any elder ever had. He never explained why he went. Never said what he hoped to find. But his hands always returned covered in frost and ash. And sometimes, not always, there was a glimmer in his eye that hadn't been there when he left. Tonight, the sky hung black over the valley. And the stars, too distant to be kind, blinked without warmth. Vaelric's boots whispered through the last stretch of dry snow. The cold bit into his bones, old wounds echoing with memory, but he didn't flinch. His right hand gripped something wrapped in wolfskin, a half-burnt staff, cracked once down the middle. He had stopped using it to walk years ago. Now it was a relic. A grave marker. A reminder. He reached the edge of the ridge where the last stones of Red Hollow Citadel still poked like teeth through the ash-choked soil. He knelt and began to dig. Not with magic. Not with tools. With his bare hands. It took hours. The night passed like a breath drawn too long. And just as the sky began to purple, his fingers brushed stone. Cold. Smooth. Etched. He wiped the soot away. And stared. A single symbol stared back. Worn. Faint. But undeniably familiar. A letter. No language needed to read it. Because he had once carved it with his mouth. Onto her spine. During a night when her breath had been so shaky with fear, with need, with something even deeper than devotion, that he hadn't known if he'd been kissing her or begging her to stay. He exhaled. It wasn't a sound. But it was a kind of release. He lowered his forehead to the stone. Not in prayer. In reverence. He didn't say her name. He didn't need to. It was etched on every bone inside him. He stood. The stone left undisturbed. The ash falling around him like old snow. And walked. Deeper into what had once been the throne room. Where nothing stood now but memory and red sky. He reached the place where the floor had cracked in a perfect spiral, the point from which her last howl had burned the world. And he whispered, voiceless and still heard. If you're anywhere still, I won't run this time. He unbuttoned the top of his shirt. The scar over his heart still pulsed faintly. He touched it, then lowered his hand. If you're here, bite me. His voice was steady. I won't move. Silence. Wind. Then, a hand. Fingers, slender and cool, pressed against his chest from behind. Not sharp. Not cruel. Not the way she'd once bitten his throat to make him hers. Just there. Present. Real. His breath caught. Not in fear, but in recognition. His eyes fluttered closed. And from somewhere deep, not his ears, not the wind, but the space between ribs and memory, a voice rose. Not loud, not spoken, but as undeniable as heartbeat. This time, I don't bite. I came to kiss you. His eyes opened. But the hand was gone. No shadow. No footprint. Only heat. Lingering. Only the faint scent of moonflower and burnt pine. He didn't turn. Didn't need to. He felt her. Not just in the air, but inside him. In the places no longer defined by bone or howl. Only by what remained after the fire. He knelt. Slowly. And laid the scorched staff at the heart of the spiral. Then leaned forward, pressing his lips to the stone like one last offering. No voice. No command. Just breath. And memory. And a name only ever spoken in silence. When the wolves of the silent cradle woke that morning, they found the keeper of the fire gone. In his tent, a single note carved into ashwood. She said the last howl was mine. I'm still holding it. The ashes on the ridge scattered that night. And in the wind. Some said they saw a woman walking. Eyes blind. Feet bare. Hair braided in ember silk. They said she didn't speak. But she smiled. And in that smile, the kingdom remembered everything it had lost. And chose to begin again. You gave me a name. So I gave you a howl. Even if it burned the whole world down.